When a waitress's playful flirting turns into a death sentence, she discovers the man she teased for 6 months isn't just dangerous, he owns Chicago's entire underworld. Lena Carter thought harmless banter with a generous tipper was just part of the job. She was wrong. The moment Victor Hale's enemies learned he cared, they burned her world to ashes. Now, with a bounty on her head and nowhere left to run, Lena faces an impossible choice: hide and die alone, or stand beside the most feared man in Chicago and survive the war she accidentally started. If you want to see how far love can go when it's forged in fire, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The morning shift at Rosie's Diner had a rhythm Lena Carter knew by heart. The clatter of dishes, the hiss of the coffee machine, the shuffle of regulars claiming their usual booths, it all blended into a familiar symphony that made Chicago's South Side feel almost safe. Almost. Lena moved between tables with practiced ease, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her apron stained with coffee and yesterday's ketchup. At 26, she'd been slinging hash browns and pouring endless refills for 5 years, saving every tip she could squeeze from tight-fisted truckers and business types who barely looked up from their phones. But there was one customer who always looked up. Victor Hale arrived every Tuesday and Friday morning at exactly 7:15, sliding into the corner booth with the kind of quiet confidence that made people instinctively step aside. Lena noticed him the first time he walked through the door 6 months ago. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched with silver at the temples, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. He wore expensive suits that didn't belong in a place where the special was $2 eggs, and he tipped like money meant nothing. $50 bills for a $10 breakfast. Sometimes more. "Morning, Mr. Mysterious," Lena said, approaching his table with the coffee pot and her trademark smirk. "Let me guess. Black coffee, wheat toast, scrambled eggs, no butter." Victor's lips curved slightly, the closest thing to a smile she usually got. "Your memory impresses me, Lena. It's called good service. You should try leaving a Yelp review." She poured his coffee with a flourish, deliberately leaning closer than necessary. "Though I'm starting to think you come here for the witty conversation more than the food." "Perhaps I do." "Careful, Mr. Hale. People might start to talk." She winked, spinning away before he could respond, her heart doing that stupid little flutter it always did when they played this game. It was harmless. Just flirting. The kind of easy banter that made minimum wage feel slightly less soul-crushing and her art school dreams seem a little less impossible. Lena had no idea she was playing with a loaded gun. 6 months. 6 months of Tuesday and Friday mornings, of playful teasing and generous tips, of a slow-burning attraction Lena convinced herself was just fantasy. Victor never crossed lines, never asked her out, never suggested anything inappropriate. He was unfailingly polite, maddeningly reserved, and completely off-limits in a way that made him even more intriguing. She knew almost nothing about him, except his name, which she'd learned from his credit card, and that he drove a black Mercedes that probably cost more than she'd make in a decade. Sometimes other men joined him, serious-faced types who spoke in low voices and left without ordering. Lena figured he was some kind of lawyer or finance guy. Rich, private, untouchable. She never imagined the truth. "You're going to give that poor man a heart attack one of these days," Rosa Martinez said, sliding past Lena with a tray of pancakes. Rosa had worked at Rosie's for 20 years and knew every player in the neighborhood. "You know who he is, right? Rich guy with good taste in diners?" Lena grabbed a fresh pot of coffee, eyeing Victor's table where he sat reading the Tribune like he had all the time in the world. Rosa's expression shifted to something between concern and disbelief. "Lena, that's Victor Hale." "Yeah, I know his name. So?" "So?" Rosa set down her tray with a heavy thunk. "Honey, Victor Hale isn't just some businessman. He's the Victor Hale. You really don't know?" Lena's stomach did an uncomfortable flip. "Know what?" Rosa glanced toward Victor's booth, then lowered her voice to barely a whisper. "He runs the North Side. The docks, the clubs, the construction unions, all of it. When people in this city have problems they can't solve legally, they go to Victor Hale. When they don't pay what they owe..." She drew a finger across her throat. The coffee pot suddenly felt heavy in Lena's hand. You're saying I'm saying you've been flirting with the most dangerous man in Chicago for 6 months, and you're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Lena's laugh came out shaky. Come on, Rosa. He's just a quiet guy who likes his eggs scrambled. You're being dramatic. But even as she said it, pieces began clicking into place. The way other customers fell silent when Victor entered. The expensive suits. The serious men who looked like they'd seen the inside of more than a few interrogation rooms. The way Victor's eyes sometimes went cold and distant, like he was calculating moves in a game Lena couldn't see. Believe what you want, Rosa said, picking up her tray again. But maybe tone down the flirting before you get yourself in trouble. Lena glanced back at Victor's booth. He was watching her over the rim of his coffee cup, those dark eyes unreadable. When he caught her looking, he raised the cup slightly in acknowledgement. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Just a customer, she told herself. Just a really good tipper who happened to be, what? A mobster? That was ridiculous. This was real life, not some movie. People like that didn't actually exist, not anymore. Did they? It's not. 3 days later, Lena arrived for the early shift to find Victor already waiting outside Rosie's, standing beside his Mercedes with two other men who looked like they ate nails for breakfast. The diner wasn't open yet, wouldn't be for another 20 minutes. Mr. Hale? Lena approached cautiously, keys jangling in her hand. We don't open until 6. I know. Victor straightened from where he'd been leaning against his car. I need to speak with you, privately. Every instinct Lena possessed screamed at her to run. The street was empty, the sky still dark, and Victor's companions looked like they could make a body disappear without breaking a sweat. Rosa's warning echoed in her head. The most dangerous man in Chicago. But Victor had never been anything but courteous. 6 months of Tuesday and Friday mornings, and he'd never made her feel unsafe. Uncomfortable, maybe, in that heart-racing, butterflies-in-stomach way, but never genuinely afraid. Until now. What's this about? Lena kept her voice steady even as her fingers tightened around her keys, the jagged metal pressing into her palm. Inside, Victor said. Please. It wasn't really a request. Lena's hands shook as she unlocked the diner door. The lights flickered on, illuminating empty booths and the long counter where she'd spent countless hours pouring coffee and pretending her life was going somewhere. Victor followed her inside while his men remained on the street, their presence a silent threat. Sit down, Lena. I'd rather stand. This isn't a negotiation. Victor's voice was still calm, still controlled, but something underneath it had shifted. This wasn't the polite customer who complimented her memory. This was someone else entirely. Lena sat. Victor took the seat across from her, his expensive suit somehow looking even more out of place in the empty diner. He didn't speak immediately, just studied her with that calculating gaze that suddenly felt far more dangerous than attractive. Do you know who I am? He finally asked. Lena's mouth went dry. You're Victor Hale. You like scrambled eggs and black coffee. Don't be clever. Not right now. His tone was gentle but firm, like he was explaining something to a child who should know better. Do you know what I do? She swallowed hard. I've heard rumors. Rumors. Victor's lip quirked, but there was no humor in it. What have you heard? That you're connected. That you have influence in the city, that people should be careful around you. Lena met his eyes, refusing to look away, even though every cell in her body wanted to. Are the rumors true? Yes. One word. Simple. Devastating. Lena's breath caught. She'd known, somehow, since Rosa's warning, but hearing Victor confirm it made everything terrifyingly real. Why are you telling me this? Because for 6 months, you've been treating me like I'm just another customer, teasing me, flirting with me. Victor leaned forward, and Lena caught the scent of expensive cologne and something darker underneath. Gunpowder, maybe, or just the weight of violence. Do you understand what that looks like to certain people? I was just being friendly. Friendly. Victor's laugh was cold. Lena, I own half this city. The other half pays me tribute to stay in business. Men who've done terrible things jump when I speak. And every Tuesday and Friday morning, I sit in this diner and let a waitress call me Mr. Mysterious and wink at me like I'm some harmless businessman. Lena's stomach twisted. I didn't know. I know you didn't, that's the problem. Victor ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human it seemed wrong coming from someone who apparently ruled Chicago's underworld. My enemies aren't stupid, Lena. They watch me. They look for weaknesses, for leverage, for anything they can exploit. And for 6 months, you've been smiling at me like I'm someone worth smiling at. The implication hit Lena like a physical blow. They think I'm important to you. Yes. But I'm not. I'm just a waitress. I'm nobody. Victor's expression softened slightly, and for just a moment, Lena caught a glimpse of the man who'd always been so careful with her, so respectful. That's not true. You're an artist with a portfolio full of paintings you think nobody notices. You're saving money for a studio space in Logan Square. You read Hemingway on your breaks and you dream about showing your work in a real gallery someday. Lena froze. How do you know that? Because I pay attention. Victor's voice dropped lower. Because when you talk about your art, your whole face lights up and I can't look away. Because you're the only person in this entire city who doesn't treat me like a monster, and that matters more than you could possibly understand. The confession hung between them, raw and honest and completely unexpected. Lena's anger warred with something else, something dangerous that felt suspiciously like hope. So what happens now? She whispered. Victor stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. Now you stop flirting with me. You serve my coffee, you take my money, and you forget we ever had this conversation. You keep your head down, you stay away from me outside this diner, and hopefully my enemies will decide you're not worth their attention. And if they don't, then I'll handle it. How? Victor's eyes went cold again, shutting down whatever vulnerability he'd shown moments before. You don't want to know. He turned to leave, but Lena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Wait, is that why you really came here? To warn me off? To make sure I understood the rules? Victor paused at the door, his back to her. I came here because you deserve to know the truth. What you do with that information is your choice. Some choice. Smile at you and die, or ignore you and maybe live. Welcome to my world, Lena. Victor looked back over his shoulder and the sadness in his expression nearly broke her. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you got caught in it. Then he was gone, slipping out into the pre-dawn darkness with his silent companions, leaving Lena alone in the empty diner with the weight of knowledge she'd never asked for. She sank back into the booth, her hands trembling. Just a waitress. Just a nobody. Except now she was a target. For 2 weeks, Lena followed the rules. She served Victor his coffee without comment, took his money without banter, and kept her eyes down like she'd been instructed. He never spoke beyond the bare minimum. Thank you, and keep the change. And the easy rapport they'd built over 6 months evaporated like steam. It should have felt safer. Instead, it felt like mourning. Rosa noticed immediately. Smart girl, she said, refilling the sugar dispensers during a slow afternoon shift. Whatever he said to you, you listened. Doesn't feel very smart. Lena wiped down the counter with more force than necessary. Feels like I lost something. Better to lose a fantasy than your life, honey. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to insist that what she'd felt with Victor wasn't just fantasy, but she couldn't find the words, because Rosa was right. Whatever connection had existed between them, if it had existed at all, wasn't worth dying for. The world didn't work like romance novels. Mob bosses didn't fall for waitresses, and women who got involved with dangerous men didn't get happy endings. They got funerals. So Lena threw herself into her art, spending every spare moment in her cramped studio apartment painting out the frustration and fear and strange grief that churned in her chest. She painted shadows and steel, sharp edges and soft light, everything she couldn't say out loud spilling onto canvas in violent, beautiful strokes. She didn't paint Victor's face, but she painted his eyes, dark and haunted and impossibly alone. It was nearly midnight on a Thursday when Lena finally admitted defeat and climbed into bed, exhausted from a double shift and 3 hours of painting. Sleep came quickly, dragging her under into dreams of coffee and expensive suits and warnings she should have heeded sooner. The smoke alarm screaming to life ripped her back to consciousness. Lena bolted upright, her lungs already burning, her eyes stinging with acrid smoke that filled the room like fog. Flames licked up the wall near her door, hungry and orange and spreading impossibly fast. The heat hit her in waves, turning her small apartment into an oven. Fire. Her building was on fire. Panic seized her throat. Lena scrambled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the floor as smoke poured in through the gap under her door. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand with shaking hands. Her paintings, months of work, her entire portfolio, stacked near the window. She couldn't save them all. She could barely save herself. Lena stumbled toward the window, coughing violently as smoke filled her lungs. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, finally yanking it open to gulp down fresh air. 4 stories up. Too high to jump, but the fire escape. It was already engulfed in flames. Someone had blocked it. Deliberately. The realization hit Lena like ice water. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't faulty wiring or a forgotten candle. Someone had set this fire. Someone had trapped her inside. Victor's enemies. They'd found her after all. Lena pressed herself against the window, the cool night air battling the heat at her back. Sirens wailed in the distance, but they wouldn't arrive in time. The fire was spreading too fast, consuming her apartment, her art, everything she owned. She was going to die here. "Help!" Lena screamed into the night, but her voice barely carried over the roar of the flames. "Somebody help me!" Below, people were gathering on the street, pointing and shouting, but nobody could reach her. The fire had cut off all the exits. She was trapped, 4 stories up, with smoke filling her lungs and fire eating through the floor beneath her feet. Lena's phone buzzed in her hand. Through streaming eyes, she saw a single text message from an unknown number. "Stay by the window. Don't move." Before she could process it, before she could even wonder who'd sent it, the screech of tires cut through the chaos below. A black Mercedes slammed to a stop directly beneath her window, and Victor Hale emerged from the driver's seat like vengeance in an expensive suit. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause to assess the situation or consider the danger. He simply climbed onto the roof of his car, balanced there with impossible calm, and looked up at Lena with eyes that promised salvation or damnation. She couldn't tell which. "Jump!" he shouted. "Are you insane?" Lena coughed, the smoke making her dizzy. "I'll die." "You'll die if you stay. Jump, Lena. I'll catch you." 4 stories. Onto the roof of a car. Into the arms of a man who ruled Chicago's underworld and had enemies willing to burn her alive just to hurt him. The floor behind Lena groaned, buckling from the heat. Flames crawled across the ceiling. In seconds, the entire room would collapse. She had no choice. Lena climbed onto the windowsill, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. The street below seemed impossibly far away, the roof of Victor's Mercedes suddenly looking very small and very hard. "Look at me," Victor commanded, his voice cutting through her panic. "Don't look down." "Look at me, Lena. Trust me." Trust him. Trust the man who'd warned her away, who'd told her to forget they'd ever connected, who'd brought this nightmare crashing into her life just by existing. Trust the only person who'd come to save her. Lena looked into Victor's eyes, dark and steady and absolutely certain, and jumped. The fall lasted forever, and no time at all. Wind rushed past her ears, her stomach dropped into her feet, and for one terrible moment Lena was absolutely convinced she was going to die. Then Victor's arms closed around her like steel bands, taking her weight and momentum and somehow, impossibly, not letting her go. They crashed together onto the roof of the Mercedes, the metal denting beneath them with a sickening crunch. But Victor held on. He held on. "I've got you," he breathed against her hair, his heart racing as fast as hers. "I've got you, Lena. You're safe." But they weren't safe. Not even close. The building groaned above them, flames shooting from multiple windows now. Other residents were screaming, trapped on upper floors. Fire trucks were arriving, their sirens deafening, but the damage was done. Lena's entire life had just gone up in smoke. Victor lifted her carefully from the car roof, his hands gentle despite the controlled fury radiating from every line of his body. The moment her feet touched the ground, Lena's legs gave out, shock and adrenaline and smoke inhalation catching up all at once. Victor caught her again, sweeping her up like she weighed nothing, carrying her away from the burning building toward where his men had materialized from nowhere, surrounding them in a protective circle. "Hospital," one of them said, a hard-faced man with a scar across his jaw. "No." Victor's voice was absolute. "Safe house. Get Marcus on the phone. I want to know who did this and I want them found. Now." Lena's head spun. She clung to Victor's shoulders, her fingers digging into expensive fabric, trying to process what had just happened. Her home was gone. Her paintings were gone. Someone had tried to kill her, actually tried to murder her. Because of him. Because she'd smiled at the wrong man. "Put me down," she whispered. "Not happening." "Victor, put me down!" He stopped, his jaw tight, but he carefully set her on her feet, keeping one hand on her waist to steady her. Lena looked up at him. This man she'd thought she knew, this stranger who'd just saved her life. "You said they might not come after me," she said, her voice breaking. "You said if I stayed away from you, I'd be safe." "I was wrong." The admission seemed to cost him. "I underestimated how desperate they've become. I'm sorry, Lena. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Lena laughed, the sound bordering on hysterical. "Everything I own just burned. My art, my clothes, my entire life. Gone. Because I smiled at you. Because I made the mistake of thinking you were just a customer instead of a monster?" Victor finished quietly. "You can say it. It's true." "I was going to say a king." Lena wiped her eyes, smearing soot across her face. "Rosa was right. You really do own this city, don't you? You're not just connected. You're the connection." "Yes." "And your enemies will keep coming after me. Tonight wasn't a warning, was it? They were trying to kill me." Victor's silence was answer enough. Lena looked back at her burning building, at the firefighters battling the blaze, at the other residents huddled on the street in their pajamas, traumatized but alive. She'd almost died tonight. Would have died, if not for Victor's intervention. This was her life now. This was the price of 6 months of harmless flirting. "What do I do?" she whispered. Victor's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a smudge of ash from her cheek. The gesture was so tender it made Lena's chest ache. "You come with me. I put you somewhere they can't reach you. I end this war before anyone else gets hurt." "End it how?" His eyes went dark. "However I have to." Lena should have been terrified, should have run screaming in the other direction, found a bus station and disappeared to somewhere Victor Hale's name meant nothing. But looking into his face, seeing the guilt and fury and something else burning there, she realized running wouldn't save her. They knew about her now. They'd already tried to kill her once. Running would just make it easier. "Okay," Lena heard herself say. "Okay. Okay? I'll come with you. I'll let you protect me." She straightened, ignoring how her hands still shook, how smoke still clung to her hair and skin. "But I need you to promise me something. Anything. When this is over, when your enemies are gone and I'm not a target anymore, you let me walk away. No strings, no obligations, no debt. You saved my life tonight, but I don't want to owe you forever." Victor's expression shifted to something unreadable. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, this waitress who'd somehow become the most dangerous liability in Chicago, and Lena wondered what he saw. Finally, he nodded. "I promise. When you're safe, you're free." It should have felt like victory, like she'd negotiated terms, maintained some control over a situation spiraling rapidly into chaos. Instead, it felt like she'd just lost something precious before she'd ever really had it. Victor turned away, issuing rapid orders to his men in low, clipped tones. Within minutes, Lena was being ushered into the back of an unmarked SUV, wrapped in a blanket someone had produced from nowhere, her feet still bare and her pajamas covered in soot. As they pulled away from her burning building, from her burning life, Lena watched Victor through the tinted window. He stood alone in the street, lit by flames and emergency lights, looking every inch the King Rosa had warned her about. And for the first time since she'd met him 6 months ago in Rosie's diner, Lena understood exactly what she'd gotten herself into. Not a romance, not a fantasy, a war. And she'd just enlisted on the side of the most dangerous man in Chicago, knowing that surrender wasn't an option anymore. She could only fight, survive, and hope that when the smoke finally cleared, there would be something left of her to walk away. The safe house turned out to be a penthouse in the Gold Coast, all floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and security that would make Fort Knox jealous. Victor's men swept through it like professionals, checking locks and sight lines, setting up equipment Lena didn't recognize and probably didn't want to understand. "It's temporary," Victor said, appearing beside her as she stood frozen in the massive living room, still clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "Until I find something more secure." More secure than this? Lena gestured at the cameras, the reinforced door, the armed guards stationed at every exit. They found you once. I won't let it happen again. The conviction in his voice should have been reassuring. Instead, it just reminded Lena of how thoroughly her life had changed in the space of a few hours. This morning, she'd been a waitress with big dreams in a modest apartment. Tonight, she was a refugee in a mobster's fortress, running from people who wanted her dead for the crime of being noticed. I need a shower, she said quietly. I need to get this smoke off me. Victor nodded toward a hallway. First door on the right. There's clothes in the closet. They might be big, but they're clean. And Lena? He waited until she met his eyes. You're safe here. I give you my word. The word of a criminal. The promise of a killer. It shouldn't have meant anything. But standing there in her ruined pajamas, homeless and hunted and more alone than she'd ever been, Lena found herself believing him anyway. She didn't sleep that night. After the shower, after scrubbing her skin raw and watching soot swirl down the drain, Lena dressed in borrowed clothes that hung loose on her frame and wandered the penthouse like a ghost. Victor had disappeared into one of the other rooms with his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and lethal as he orchestrated whatever response he'd planned. Lena didn't ask, didn't want to know. Instead, she stood at the window watching the city stretch out below, glittering and oblivious. Somewhere out there, people were sleeping in their beds, safe and ordinary. Somewhere out there, her building was still smoldering, her paintings reduced to ash, her normal life officially over. She should have been crying, should have been breaking down, giving in to the terror that clawed at her throat. But Lena felt strangely numb, like she was watching everything happen to someone else. You should rest. Lena didn't turn at the sound of Victor's voice. Can't sleep. I know the feeling. He moved to stand beside her, maintaining a careful distance. I've had your building checked. The fire started in 3 places simultaneously. Accelerant spread through the ventilation. Professional job. Good to know I was worth hiring professionals. Lena, who did this? She finally looked at him, this man who'd invaded her life without permission and dragged her into a nightmare. Who hates you enough to burn innocent people alive just to get to you? Victor's jaw tightened. The Castellano family. They've been pushing into my territory for months, trying to force a war. I've been holding them back, keeping things contained. His voice dropped. They must have decided you were a faster route to breaking me. Were they right? The question hung between them, heavy with implications Lena wasn't sure she wanted examined. Victor turned to face her fully, and in the dim light from the city below, he looked older, harder, like the weight of his choices was carved into every line of his face. Yes, he said simply. Hurting you would have destroyed me. That's why I tried to warn you off. That's why I stayed away these past 2 weeks, even though every instinct I had screamed at me to keep you close. I thought distance would protect you. But it didn't. No. The words sounded like a confession. They'd already marked you. The moment you smiled at me the first time, the moment I let myself smile back, you became a target. I should have known better. I should have walked away and never come back. Why didn't you? Victor's laugh was bitter. Because you made me feel human again, Lena. Because for 6 months, every Tuesday and Friday, I got to pretend I was just a man having coffee, talking to a beautiful woman who didn't know what I'd done or who I'd hurt. You saw someone worth smiling at, and I couldn't give that up. The confession was raw and honest and far more dangerous than any threat from his enemies. Lena's breath caught as something shifted between them. The careful distance Victor had maintained finally crumbling under the weight of everything they'd survived tonight. I never stopped seeing that person, Lena heard herself admit, even after you told me the truth, even after you warned me away. I kept looking for him at the diner, kept hoping you'd come back and things would go back to normal. There's no normal for men like me. Maybe not. Lena reached out slowly, giving Victor time to pull away, and placed her hand against his chest where his heart beat steady and strong beneath expensive fabric. But there's this. Right now. The fact that you came for me when I needed you, that counts for something. Victor's hand covered hers, his skin warm and solid and real. It doesn't make up for what I've cost you. No, Lena agreed, but it's a start. They stood there as the city breathed around them, 2 people who shouldn't have mattered to each other, bound together by circumstance and 6 months of coffee shop chemistry that had bloomed into something neither of them could control. Tomorrow would bring war. retaliation, blood. But tonight, Lena let herself lean into Victor's warmth and pretend that dangerous men could be more than their worst choices, that waitresses could survive fires and come out stronger, that love born in ashes might somehow, impossibly, find a way to grow. Even if that growth came with a body count, even if walking away, when this was finally over, might cost her more than staying. The city lights blurred as exhaustion finally dragged Lena under, her head resting against Victor's shoulder, his arms coming around her like the fortress she'd never known she needed. And in the darkness, Victor Hale made a silent promise to every enemy who'd ever doubted him, to every rival who thought burning a building would break him. They'd touched what was his. Now they would burn. Dawn broke over Chicago with the kind of cruel brightness that made tragedy seem impossible. Lena woke on an unfamiliar couch, her neck stiff and her mouth tasting like ash, the events of the previous night crashing back with devastating clarity. For one blissful moment between sleep and consciousness, she'd forgotten about the fire, the jump, the fact that her entire life had gone up in flames. Then reality settled in like a weight on her chest. Victor was already awake, standing by the windows with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian that sounded both beautiful and deadly. He'd changed into fresh clothes, dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He looked like he'd slept even less than Lena had, dark circles shadowing his eyes, his jaw tight with controlled fury. "I don't care what excuses they're making," Victor said into the phone, his voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Find Paolo Castellano. Find him today or find yourself unemployed. Permanently." He ended the call with a vicious swipe and turned to find Lena watching him. His expression softened immediately, the cold calculation melting into something warmer, more human. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I jumped off a building." Lena sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. "How long did I sleep?" 3 hours. Not enough." Victor moved to the kitchen, gleaming marble and stainless steel that looked like it had never been used, and started making coffee with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times. "You should try to rest more. It's going to be a long day." "Doing what? Hiding?" "Planning." Victor pulled 2 mugs from a cabinet, pouring rich, dark coffee that smelled like heaven. "The Castellanos made their move. Now I make mine." Lena accepted the coffee he offered, wrapping both hands around the mug and savoring the warmth. It was good, far better than the cheap diner coffee she'd been serving for years. Everything in Victor's world seemed like that. Better, richer, more intense, more dangerous. "I should call work," she said suddenly. "Rosa will be worried. People will have questions about the fire." "Already handled. I spoke with the diner owner this morning. You're on extended leave due to the trauma of losing your home. Your final paycheck will be deposited by the end of the week, along with a generous settlement for your suffering." Lena's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "You paid off my boss?" "I compensated him fairly for the disruption, and I made sure Rosa knows you're safe." Victor settled into the chair across from her, his own coffee untouched. "You can't go back there, Lena. Not now. Maybe not ever. Everyone who knows you, everyone you interact with regularly, they're all potential leverage against me, against you." The implication settled over Lena like a shroud. No job, no home, no normal life to return to. She was completely dependent on Victor now, isolated from everything familiar, cut off from the world she'd spent 26 years building. "So what am I supposed to do?" The question came out sharper than she'd intended. "Just sit here in your fortress while you wage war on my behalf? You survived last night because you were smart and you trusted me." Victor's eyes held hers steadily. "Keep doing both of those things, and you'll survive what comes next." "And what comes next?" Victor's phone buzzed before he could answer. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "That depends on what my sources tell me. Excuse me." He stepped away, leaving Lena alone with her coffee and the stunning view of a city that suddenly felt hostile. She moved to the windows, looking down at the streets below where people moved like ants, ordinary and oblivious. Yesterday, she'd been one of them. Today, she was something else entirely. A liability, a weakness, a target painted on Victor Hale's back just for existing. "We have a problem." Lena turned to find Victor standing in the doorway, his phone still in his hand, his face carved from stone. What kind of problem? The kind where Paolo Castellano is holding a press conference in 2 hours, claiming responsibility for the fire. Victor's voice was dangerously calm. He's calling it justice. Retaliation for crimes I supposedly committed against his family. He's making you the centerpiece of his narrative, the innocent victim caught in my web. Lena's stomach dropped. He's admitting he tried to kill me? He's spinning it, saying the fire was meant to send a message, not hurt civilians, that the deaths of other tenants in the building are my fault for putting you in danger in the first place. Victor's jaw clenched so hard Lena heard his teeth grind. He's positioning himself as the reasonable one, the one willing to negotiate for peace. Can he do that? He just did, and every news station in Chicago will eat it up because nothing sells like a mob war with a beautiful woman caught in the middle. Victor crossed to her, his hands coming up to frame her face with surprising gentleness. This is going to get worse before it gets better, much worse. Are you sure you want to stay? Lena thought about the promise he'd made last night, that when this was over she could walk away free, that there would be no debt, no obligation, no strings tying her to the darkness Victor inhabited. She could still take that out, could beg him to put her on a bus to somewhere far away, give her money to start over where Paolo Castellano's vendetta couldn't reach. But running wouldn't bring back her paintings, wouldn't restore her home or her sense of safety, wouldn't erase the memory of flames crawling across her ceiling or the terror of jumping into open air with nothing but Victor's promise to catch her. And it wouldn't stop the rage building in her chest, white-hot and righteous, at men who thought they could burn her alive and call it a message. I'm not going anywhere, Lena said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. If Paolo Castellano wants to make me part of his story, then I'll make sure the world knows what really happened. I'll tell them he tried to murder me, that he killed 3 other people who died in that fire, that he's a terrorist hiding behind a suit in a press conference. Victor's eyes blazed with something fierce and proud. That's dangerous, Lena. Going public means putting yourself in the spotlight. It makes you an even bigger target. I'm already a target. At least this way I'm fighting back. For a long moment, Victor simply looked at her, and Lena saw the war playing out behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to lock her away somewhere safe warring with the part that recognized her strength, her right to make her own choices, even when those choices led deeper into darkness. Finally, he nodded. Then we do this together. But we do it smart. I have contacts at 3 major networks. We'll arrange an exclusive interview, controlled environment, security in place. You tell your story exactly as it happened, and I'll make sure the world listens. When? Tonight, before Paolo's narrative has time to take root. Victor pulled out his phone again, already typing rapidly. I'll have my lawyer prep you on what to say, what questions to expect. Marcus will handle security. And Lena? He looked up, his expression deadly serious. Once you do this, there's no going back. You'll be declaring war just as surely as I am. The Castellanos won't forgive it. Good, Lena said, surprised by the venom in her own voice, because I won't forgive them either. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that left Lena's head spinning. Victor's lawyer arrived, a sharp-eyed woman named Diana Chen, who reminded Lena of a shark in designer heels, and walked her through exactly what she could and couldn't say on camera without opening herself up to legal trouble. Stick to facts, Diana instructed, perched on the edge of the couch with a tablet full of notes. The fire started at 11:47 p.m. You woke to smoke and flames. The fire escape was blocked. Victor Hale arrived and helped you escape. 3 other residents died. You lost everything. Don't speculate about who started the fire. Let the evidence speak for itself. But Paolo admitted it, Lena protested. He admitted to sending a message, not to murder. The distinction matters legally. Diana's expression softened slightly. I know you want justice, so do I, but giving them ammunition to discredit you helps no one. Marcus, the scarred man from last night who turned out to be Victor's head of security, briefed her on safety protocols with the kind of clinical detachment that suggested he'd done this before, probably many times. Stay where the cameras can see you, he said, his voice like gravel. Don't go anywhere alone, not even the bathroom. If you hear anything unusual, you drop to the floor immediately and let us handle it. Understood? Lena nodded, her mouth dry. This was really happening. She was really about to go on television and paint a target on her back for all of Chicago to see. Victor found her an hour before the interview, standing alone in the bedroom he'd given her, staring at the clothes his people had somehow acquired. Designer labels in exactly her size, more expensive than anything she'd ever owned. "Having second thoughts?" he asked from the doorway. "Third and fourth thoughts." Lena touched the silk blouse laid out on the bed, marveling at how soft it felt. "How did you know my size?" "I pay attention." Victor stepped into the room, and suddenly the spacious bedroom felt intimate, charged with the same electricity that had always crackled between them at the diner. "You don't have to do this, Lena. I can still get you out of Chicago, somewhere warm, far away. A new identity, a fresh start. Is that what you want?" "What I want doesn't matter. This is about keeping you alive." Lena turned to face him fully. This man who'd upended her entire world just by being kind to a waitress who'd flirted too freely. "What if I asked you the same question? What if I told you to walk away, end the war, give Paolo Castellano whatever he wants so we could both be safe?" Victor's laugh was hollow. "Men like Paolo don't want territory or money. They want submission. They want to prove they're stronger, more ruthless, more willing to cross lines. If I gave him what he wanted today, he'd just demand more tomorrow, and the next day, until there was nothing left. So we fight. I fight. You've already sacrificed enough." Lena closed the distance between them, her hand coming up to rest against Victor's chest, where she could feel his heart beating steady and strong. "Those 3 people who died in the fire, did you know them?" Victor's expression tightened. "Mrs. Chen on the second floor. She used to give candy to neighborhood kids. Thomas Rodriguez, a college student working 2 jobs to pay tuition. And Sarah Brennan, a nurse who'd just gotten engaged." He recited their names like a prayer, like penance. "I know everyone who dies because of me, Lena. I carry them all." "Then let me carry some of that weight." Lena looked up at him, seeing past the expensive clothes and the dangerous reputation to the man underneath, the one who'd saved her life, who'd tried to protect her even when it cost him, who remembered 3 victims by name when he could have just called them collateral damage. "Let me fight for them too. They deserve better than being forgotten." Victor's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating tenderness. "You're remarkable, you know that? Terrifying and remarkable. I'm a waitress who paints in her spare time." "You're so much more than that." Victor's voice dropped lower, rougher. "You're the woman who smiled at a monster and saw something worth saving. Who jumped off a burning building because she trusted me to catch her. Who's standing here ready to declare war because 3 strangers deserved better. You're everything good I've spent years trying to protect, Lena, and I'm the worst thing that could have happened to you." The confession hung between them, raw and honest and heartbreaking. Lena knew he was right, that Victor Hale represented everything she should run from, that loving a man like him could only end in tragedy. But she also knew that without him she'd be dead, that his darkness had saved her when nothing else could. "Maybe," Lena whispered, rising up on her toes until her lips were inches from his. "Or maybe you're exactly what I needed to stop hiding, to stop playing it safe, to actually fight for something instead of just dreaming about it." She kissed him then, closing that final distance with a recklessness that would have terrified her yesterday. But yesterday she'd been a different person, someone who believed the world was basically safe, that following the rules would protect her, that dangerous men were just fantasies confined to movies and books. Today she knew better. Victor froze for half a heartbeat, giving her time to pull back to reconsider. Then his arms came around her like steel bands, and he was kissing her back with the kind of desperate intensity that made Lena's knees weak. His mouth was hot and demanding, tasting like coffee and something darker, more addictive. His hands tangled in her hair, angling her head to deepen the kiss, and Lena melted into him with a soft sound that was part surrender, part victory. This was dangerous, stupid, a complication neither of them could afford. It was also inevitable. They broke apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, the world narrowing to just this moment, this connection, this terrible, beautiful choice they were making together. "When this is over," Victor said hoarsely, "when you're safe and free and you can walk away like I promised, will you still want this? Want me?" Lena pulled back enough to meet his eyes, seeing the vulnerability there beneath all his careful control. He was asking if she could love him past the danger, past the war, past everything that made sense. If this was just adrenaline and circumstance, or something real enough to survive daylight. I don't know, she answered honestly. Ask me when we're both still alive. Victor's laugh was rough but genuine. Fair enough. He pressed one more kiss to her forehead, gentle and reverent, before stepping back and rebuilding the careful distance between them. Get dressed. We have a war to win. The television studio was smaller than Lena expected, all bright lights and makeup chairs and producers rushing around with clipboards. Marcus and 3 other security guards formed a protective circle around her the moment they arrived, their eyes scanning every face, every shadow, looking for threats Lena couldn't see. The reporter was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an expression that suggested she'd seen her share of tragedy. Her name was Jennifer Walsh, and she shook Lena's hand with genuine sympathy. I'm sorry for what you've been through, Jennifer said as they settled into chairs positioned to catch the best light. I promise to let you tell your story without sensationalizing it. Chicago deserves to know the truth. Lena nodded, her throat tight. Victor stood just off camera, watching with an intensity that made her feel both protected and exposed. Diana Chen hovered nearby, ready to intervene if the questions crossed any legal lines. We're live in 30 seconds, a producer called out. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. No going back. Jennifer reached over and squeezed her hand once, quick and reassuring, then settled into her professional demeanor as the cameras went live. Good evening, Chicago. I'm Jennifer Walsh, and tonight we have an exclusive interview with Lena Carter, survivor of last night's devastating fire in Lincoln Park that claimed 3 lives and left dozens homeless. Lena, thank you for speaking with us during this difficult time. Thank you for having me. Lena was proud of how steady her voice sounded, even as her hands trembled in her lap. Let's start at the beginning. Can you walk us through what happened last night? Lena took a breath and began recounting the nightmare, the smoke alarm, the flames, the blocked fire escape. She kept her voice calm, her facts straight, exactly as Diana had coached. But when she got to the part about Victor's arrival, about jumping 4 stories into his arms, emotion crept in despite her best efforts. He saved my life, Lena said simply. If Victor Hale hadn't been there, I would have burned to death with Mrs. Chen, Thomas Rodriguez, and Sarah Brennan. 3 people who did nothing wrong except live in a building someone decided to use as a message. Jennifer leaned forward slightly. Paolo Castellano held a press conference this morning claiming the fire was never meant to hurt innocent people, that it was a warning aimed at Victor Hale specifically. What's your response to that? My response is that 3 people are dead. Whether he meant to kill them or not doesn't change the fact that they're gone, that their families are planning funerals instead of celebrating another day together. Lena felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. You don't get to set a building on fire and then claim innocence when people die. That's not a warning, it's terrorism. She saw Diana tense slightly at the word, but Lena didn't care. It was true. Jennifer nodded slowly. There's been speculation about your relationship with Victor Hale. Some reports suggest you were romantically involved. Can you address that? This was the dangerous part. The question that could make her look like a mob boss's girlfriend, complicit in his crimes, tainted by association. I was a waitress at a diner where Mr. Hale was a regular customer, Lena said carefully. We had friendly conversations. He was always respectful, always kind. I had no idea who he really was until recently. She paused, choosing her next words with deliberate precision. But I do know that when I needed help, when I was trapped in a burning building with no way out, Victor Hale risked his life to save mine. Whatever else he may be, he's the reason I'm sitting here tonight instead of in the morgue. And the other victims? What would you say to their families? Lena's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry they got caught in something they had nothing to do with. I'm sorry their lives were stolen because someone wanted to send a message. And I'm sorry that in this city, that kind of violence is something we've learned to accept as normal. She looked directly into the camera, addressing not Jennifer, but everyone watching. It's not normal. It's not acceptable. And the people responsible need to face justice. Not just for me, but for Mrs. Chen, for Thomas, for Sarah, and for everyone else who's been hurt in this war. Jennifer let the moment breathe, giving Lena's words space to land. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. What happens now for you, Lena? I don't know, Lena admitted. I lost my home, my belongings, my sense of safety. But I'm alive, and that means I have a choice. I can hide, or I can stand up and demand better. For myself, and for this city. She wiped her eyes, sitting up straighter. I choose to stand. The interview wrapped a few minutes later. The moment the cameras went dark, Lena's carefully maintained composure shattered. Her hands shook, her breath came in gasps, and if Victor hadn't been there to catch her, she would have collapsed. You did perfectly, he murmured against her hair, his arms solid and safe around her. You were incredible. I called Paolo Castellano a terrorist on live television. Yes, you did. Victor pulled back enough to meet her eyes, and what she saw there stole her breath. Pride, admiration, and something deeper that neither of them could afford to name. He'll retaliate. You know that, right? Let him try. Lena's voice was steadier now, anger burning away the fear. I'm done being afraid. Marcus appeared at Victor's elbow, his expression grim. We need to move, now. I'm getting reports of suspicious activity near the exits. Victor's whole demeanor shifted instantly, the tender man disappearing behind the dangerous one. How many? Unknown. Could be nothing. Could be an ambush. Marcus was already moving, his hand on the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Either way, we don't take chances. They moved as a unit, Victor, Lena, and 4 armed guards who surrounded her like a human shield. The hallways of the television station suddenly seemed endless, every shadow a potential threat, every echo a warning. Lena's heart raced, her earlier bravado evaporating as reality crashed back. She'd just declared war on national television. Paolo Castellano wouldn't let that stand. They burst through a side exit into the parking garage, Marcus in the lead, his gun now drawn and ready. The SUV was waiting exactly where they'd left it, but something felt wrong. The air was too still, too quiet. Get her in the car, Victor ordered, his voice clipped and cold. Marcus, take point. Anthony, sweep the perimeter. Nobody moves until... The explosion turned the world into fire and noise and chaos. Lena felt Victor tackle her to the ground, his body covering hers as debris rained down around them. Her ears rang, her vision swam, and for one terrible moment she was back in her apartment, trapped by flames, certain she was about to die. Stay down, Victor shouted, though his voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. Lena, stay down! Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks that echoed through the garage. Lena pressed herself against the concrete, Victor's weight crushing and protective, as chaos exploded around them. She couldn't see what was happening, could only hear shouting and more gunfire and the screech of tires. Then Victor was hauling her up, half carrying her toward a different vehicle. Marcus's sedan, already running, the back door open and waiting. Go, go, go! Victor shoved her inside and dove in after her as Marcus hit the gas. The car rocketed forward, engine screaming, just as another explosion tore through the garage where their SUV had been parked seconds before. Lena twisted to look back, seeing flames and smoke, and Victor's security team returning fire at shadows she couldn't quite make out. It looked like a war zone, impossible and surreal and utterly, terrifyingly real. Is anyone hurt? Victor was already checking her over, his hands running over her arms, her head, searching for injuries. Lena, talk to me. Are you hurt? I don't think so. Lena's voice sounded strange in her own ears, high and thin. What happened? Car bomb. They were waiting for us. Victor's expression was murderous. Marcus, casualties? Anthony took shrapnel, Marcus reported from the front seat, his voice deadly calm despite the chaos they'd just escaped. He's mobile. The others are securing the scene. Get us to the secondary location and call in every favor we have. I want Paolo Castellano's head on a spike by morning. Lena stared at Victor, seeing him fully for the first time, not the man who'd saved her, not the customer who'd tipped generously and made her heart flutter, but the king of Chicago's underworld in all his terrible glory. His eyes were cold, calculating, ruthless. This was the man who'd built an empire on fear and violence, who ruled through strength and didn't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatened what was his. And right now, what was his was sitting beside him, shaking and scared and realizing just how deep into darkness she'd fallen. "They tried to kill us," Lena whispered. "Yes. On camera. They tried to kill us right after I went on television." "They're sending a message." Victor's jaw was tight enough to crack teeth. "That there's nowhere safe. That coming after me means death, no matter how public, no matter how many witnesses." "Well, what do we do?" Victor looked at her then, and Lena saw the war in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to send her away, to protect her at any cost, warring with the part that knew she was already too deep, that running would only delay the inevitable. "We do what we planned," he said finally. "We end this. Permanently." The safe house they arrived at 40 minutes later was nothing like the Gold Coast penthouse. This was a fortified compound on the outskirts of the city, all reinforced walls and armed guards and security systems that belonged in a military installation. Marcus didn't slow down until they were through 3 separate checkpoints, and even then he kept his weapon close. Victor's phone had been ringing nonstop since the explosion. He answered some calls, ignored others, his conversations terse and coded. Lena caught fragments. Names she didn't recognize, locations that meant nothing to her, references to shipments and routes and leverage that painted a picture of the empire Victor controlled. "The television interview is already trending," Diana Chen reported, appearing on a video call that Victor projected onto a tablet. 30 million views and climbing. The hashtag Justice for Lena is #1 in Chicago, #3 nationally. Public opinion is swinging hard against the Castellanos. "And the bombing?" Victor asked. "Caught on security cameras. Every news outlet in the country is running it. You shielding Lena during the blast is being called heroic." Diana's expression was carefully neutral. "The narrative is shifting exactly as we hoped. Paolo Castellano is looking more like a terrorist and less like a businessman every minute." "Good. Use it. I want every politician he's bought, every judge he's compromised, every dirty cop on his payroll to suddenly remember they have principles. Apply pressure everywhere until something breaks." Diana nodded and disconnected. Victor set down the tablet and finally let his control slip. He slumped forward, bracing his hands on his knees, his breath coming hard. "Victor?" Lena reached out tentatively, touching his shoulder. "I almost lost you." His voice was raw. "If I'd been half a second slower, if that bomb had detonated while you were still near the car..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Lena slid closer, wrapping her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. She felt him shaking, this man who'd seemed invincible, who ruled Chicago through strength and fear, reduced to trembling at the thought of her death. "But you didn't lose me," she whispered. "You saved me. Again. How many times, Lena? How many times can I pull you back from the edge before my luck runs out?" Victor turned in her embrace, his hands coming up to frame her face with desperate gentleness. "You should hate me. You should be screaming for me to let you go, to send you somewhere safe, somewhere I can't touch you. Is that what you want?" "What I want is impossible." Victor's thumb traced her lower lip, the gesture achingly tender. "I want you safe, and I want you close. And I can't have both. Not while Paolo Castellano is still breathing." Lena understood what he was really saying, what he couldn't quite bring himself to ask. She thought about the promise he'd made, that when this was over, she could walk away free, that there would be no debt, no obligation, but that promise had been made before the car bomb, before she'd looked into his eyes and seen not a monster, but a man carrying impossible weight, before she'd realized that walking away from Victor Hale might save her life, but would cost her something far more precious. "Then we make it possible," Lena said, her voice steady despite everything. "We end Paolo Castellano. We win this war, and then..." She paused, searching Victor's eyes. "Then we figure out what comes after. Together?" It was the first time he'd asked for anything, the first time he'd let himself hope for more than survival. Lena knew she should be careful, should hedge her bets, should remember that love born in violence rarely survived peace. But careful had never gotten her anywhere. Careful had kept her slinging coffee in a diner instead of showing her art in galleries. Careful had made her small and safe and invisible. And Lena was done being invisible. "Together," she promised, sealing it with a kiss that tasted like smoke and possibility and the beginning of something neither of them could control. Outside, Chicago burned with the news of their war. Inside, two people who should never have met held on to each other like salvation, knowing that tomorrow would bring blood and bullets and choices no one should have to make. But tonight, they had this, each other, and the fragile, dangerous hope that love might somehow be stronger than the darkness trying to destroy them, even if that hope came with a body count, even if surviving meant becoming something neither of them recognized. The war had begun, and there was no turning back. The war room looked nothing like Lena expected. She'd imagined something dark and cinematic, shadowy figures around a table covered in weapons and cash. But reality was far more mundane. A converted warehouse office with whiteboards covered in names and connections, laptops displaying financial records, and a dozen serious-faced men and women who looked more like accountants than criminals. Victor stood at the center of it all, commanding the room with quiet authority that needed no raised voice or dramatic gesture. He'd changed into tactical gear, black pants, fitted shirt, shoulder holster visible, and the transformation was complete. This wasn't the man who'd held her through the night. This was the king in his element, preparing for war. Paolo's moving product through the port on Thursday, a woman named Catherine reported, tapping her laptop screen to project shipping manifests onto the wall. 5 containers marked as industrial equipment, actually cocaine, street value around $40 million. How solid is the intel? Victor asked. Came from inside his organization. One of his lieutenants has been skimming profits. We offered him protection and a new identity in exchange for everything he knows. Catherine's smile was sharp. He's been very cooperative. Victor studied the manifests with the focus of a chess master planning 6 moves ahead. We intercept the shipment and hand it to the feds. Let them do the heavy lifting. What about his political connections? A man named James spoke up, his Boston accent thick. The photos you wanted. Senator Morrison accepting cash payments, Judge Chen signing off on sealed warrants, 3 CPD captains at Castellano's private club. We've got them all documented, time-stamped, ready to go public. Good. Diana's preparing the media package. The moment Paolo makes his next move, we bury him in every newspaper and news site in the country. Victor's expression was carved from ice. He wants a war? We'll give him one he can't survive. Lena stood in the doorway, watching this coordinated dismantling of an empire, and felt simultaneously awed and terrified. This wasn't just revenge. This was systematic destruction, executed with the precision of a surgeon removing cancer. Victor wasn't just fighting back. He was erasing Paolo Castellano from existence. You should be resting. Lena jumped slightly at Marcus's voice beside her. The scarred security chief had appeared like a ghost, his expression unreadable as always. Couldn't sleep, Lena admitted. Every time I close my eyes, I see the explosion, feel the heat, hear the gunfire. Normal response to trauma. Marcus's tone was clinical, but not unkind. First time being shot at? Is it that obvious? You're still standing, still coherent, still making rational decisions. That puts you ahead of most civilians. Marcus nodded toward where Victor was coordinating with his team. He's good at this. The strategy, the planning, but he's distracted, worried about you. Lena heard the unspoken warning in Marcus's words. You think I'm a liability. I think you're a complication he doesn't need right now. Marcus met her eyes directly. But I also think you're stronger than he gives you credit for. The question is whether you're strong enough for what's coming. And what's coming? Blood, a lot of it. Paolo won't go down quietly, and when cornered, men like him burn everything to the ground rather than surrender. Marcus's scarred face was grim. Victor will do whatever it takes to protect you, even if it costs him everything. You need to decide if you can live with that. Before Lena could respond, Victor looked up and caught sight of her. His expression softened immediately, the cold strategist melting into something warmer, more human. He excused himself from the group and crossed to where she stood, concern etched in every line of his face. You should be sleeping, he said, echoing Marcus's words but with infinitely more gentleness. So should you. Lena reached up to touch the dark circles under his eyes. When was the last time you slept more than an hour? I'll sleep when Paolo Castellano is in handcuffs or a grave, preferably the latter. Victor caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Come on, you don't need to see this. But Lena pulled back, standing her ground. Actually, I do. This war is happening because of me. Because Paolo decided I mattered to you. I should at least understand what we're fighting. Victor's jaw tightened, and Lena saw him wrestling with the instinct to protect her versus respecting her agency. Finally, he nodded. All right, but if it gets to be too much, you tell me. No heroics. He guided her into the war room proper, and suddenly all eyes were on Lena, assessing, calculating, wondering what kind of woman could capture the attention of a man like Victor Hale. She felt exposed, out of place among these professionals who spoke in codes and carried weapons like accessories. Everyone, this is Lena Carter, Victor announced, his hand steady on her lower back. She's under my protection, which means she's under yours. Anyone who touches her answers to me personally. The message was clear, and Lena watched understanding ripple through the room. She wasn't just some civilian caught in the crossfire. She mattered to Victor, which meant she mattered to all of them. Catherine approached first, extending her hand with a slight smile. The woman who called Paolo Castellano a terrorist on live TV, I like you already. Thanks, I think. Lena shook her hand, grateful for the friendly gesture. What you're all doing here, planning this attack on Paolo's operations, is this legal? Define legal, James said with a dry laugh. We're exposing crimes, gathering evidence, protecting an innocent woman from a terrorist organization. That the methods are unconventional doesn't make them wrong. It makes them prosecutable if anyone finds out, Lena countered. Let them try. Victor's voice was steel. I've been dancing on the legal edge for 15 years. My lawyers are better than theirs, and I have enough leverage to make sure any investigation goes nowhere. Paolo doesn't have that luxury anymore. We've already started leaking information about his operations to the FBI, DEA, and ATF. By the end of the week, he'll have federal agents crawling up his ass from 3 different directions. Lena absorbed this, the reality of what Victor did, who he was, crystallizing with uncomfortable clarity. This wasn't some Robin Hood stealing from the rich. This was a man who'd built his empire on violence and intimidation, who knew exactly how to manipulate systems to his advantage, who could ruin lives with a phone call. And yet, when he looked at her, she saw something else. Someone else. The man who'd risked everything to save her, who carried the weight of 3 innocent deaths like stones in his chest, who'd promised her freedom even knowing it might cost him the only real connection he'd made in years. Show me the plan, Lena said, surprising herself with her own resolve. All of it. If I'm going to be part of this, I want to understand exactly what we're doing. Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Catherine, bring up the timeline. The next 2 hours were a crash course in urban warfare, corporate espionage, and strategic manipulation. Catherine walked Lena through the entire operation, how they'd identified Paolo's vulnerabilities, mapped his supply chains, documented his crimes, and prepared a coordinated assault that would hit him from every angle simultaneously. Thursday night, the port shipment gets intercepted, Catherine explained, pointing to a map of Chicago's waterfront. We've already tipped off the Coast Guard. They'll find the cocaine, trace it back to Paolo's shell companies. That's the first domino. Friday morning, the photos go public, James added. Every politician and judge on Paolo's payroll will scramble to distance themselves. His protection evaporates overnight. And Saturday, Victor finished, his voice cold as winter. The FBI executes warrants on all his legitimate businesses based on evidence we've been feeding them for weeks. His assets get frozen, his associates get arrested, and Paolo Castellano watches his empire collapse in real time. What happens to him? Lena asked quietly. If he's smart, he runs, takes whatever money he can salvage, and disappears to a country without extradition. Victor's expression suggested he didn't think Paolo was that smart. If he's stupid, he tries to fight back, comes after us directly. And if he does, then I kill him myself. The words hung in the air, brutal and honest. No euphemism, no dancing around the reality. If Paolo Castellano didn't surrender or flee, Victor would end him, permanently. Lena should have been horrified, should have recoiled from this casual discussion of murder. But all she could think about were the 3 people who died in her building, the families planning funerals, the terror of jumping from a burning window not knowing if she'd survive. Paolo Castellano had done that, had ordered it, planned it, executed it without a moment's hesitation. And now he was trying to kill her again, to kill Victor, to prove he was untouchable. Maybe monsters did need to be fought with monstrous methods. When does this start? Lena asked. It already has, Victor said. Paolo just doesn't know it yet. As if summoned by the conversation, Victor's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. "Speak of the devil," he answered, putting it on speaker. "Castellano, to what do I owe the displeasure?" Paolo Castellano's voice came through smooth and confident, with just a hint of amusement that made Lena's skin crawl. "Victor, I saw your little pet's television interview. Very touching. The damsel in distress routine plays well with the cameras. She told the truth, that you're a murderer and a terrorist." Victor's voice was dangerously calm. "How does it feel, Paolo, knowing the whole city watched you fail to kill an unarmed woman?" "Temporarily fail. I'm nothing if not persistent." Paolo's laugh was cold. "But I'm calling to offer you one last chance to be reasonable. You have something I want, access to the southern docks, 3 of my best suppliers, and $2 million in product you stole last month. Return what's mine, and I'll forget about your little waitress. She can go back to her pathetic life, and we can all move forward." Lena felt Victor's hand tighten on her shoulder, protective and possessive. "Counteroffer. You turn yourself in to the FBI, confess to every crime you've committed, and maybe I let you live long enough to see the inside of a federal prison. You think you're in a position to make demands?" Paolo's amusement faded into something harder. "I own this city, Victor. I always have. You're just a businessman playing at being a gangster, a weak man who lets emotions cloud his judgment." "Emotions like not wanting to murder innocent people?" Victor's voice could have cut glass. "Yeah, guilty as charged. Must be hard for you to understand, lacking a conscience and all." "Conscience is for men who can afford it. Men with nothing to lose." Paolo's tone shifted, becoming almost conversational. "Tell me, Victor, how's Anthony doing? I heard he took some shrapnel in that parking garage. Such a shame. Good men are hard to find." The threat was clear. Paolo knew who worked for Victor, knew their names, could target them individually. Victor's expression went absolutely glacial. "You touch one of my people, Paolo, and I'll burn your entire family to the ground. Children, wives, grandmothers, everyone. Don't test me." Big words from a man hiding behind security guards. Paolo laughed again, the sound grating. "You've got 48 hours to reconsider. Return what's mine, or I start sending pieces of your waitress back to you. Maybe a finger first, then an ear. We'll see how long it takes before you remember that business is business, and she's just collateral." The line went dead. Silence filled the war room, heavy and suffocating. Lena found she couldn't breathe, the casual way Paolo had discussed mutilating her, making her stomach turn. This was real. He really would do it, would cut her apart piece by piece just to prove a point. "We move up the timeline," Victor said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion. "I want everything in motion by tomorrow night. No waiting for Thursday. We hit him now, hit him hard, and we don't stop until he's finished." "That doesn't give us much time to coordinate," Catherine protested. "The feds aren't ready to move." "I don't care. Make them ready." Victor's eyes were black ice. Paolo just threatened to torture Lena to death. "We're past the point of careful planning. This ends tomorrow, one way or another." Marcus stepped forward, his tactical mind already working. "If we're accelerating, we need to relocate Lena to a more secure location. This compound is good, but not impenetrable. Paolo knows we're somewhere outside the city. It's only a matter of time before he narrows it down." "Where do you suggest?" "The lake house. It's off the grid, only 3 people know the location, and it's got enough security to withstand a small army." Marcus looked at Lena. "But it means isolation. No phone, no internet, no contact with anyone until this is over." Lena's heart sank. "For how long?" 48 hours. Maybe less if things go our way." Victor moved to stand in front of her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "I know it's not ideal, but Paolo just made his intentions crystal clear. I won't risk him making good on that threat." "And what will you be doing while I'm locked away in some bunker?" "Ending this." Victor's voice was absolute. "Whatever it takes." Lena saw the determination in his eyes, the cold calculation of a man who'd made his decision and wouldn't be swayed. This was what Marcus had warned her about. Victor would do anything to protect her, even if it meant crossing lines he could never uncross, becoming a monster to fight monsters. "Promise me something," Lena said quietly, aware that everyone in the room was listening but not caring. "Promise me you won't lose yourself in this, that when it's over you'll still be the man who saved me, not just another killer who got away with it." Victor's expression cracked, pain flashing across his features before he locked it down. I can't promise that, Lena. The things I'll have to do in the next 48 hours. He stopped, unable to finish. Then promise me you'll try. That you'll remember why you're doing this. Not for revenge or pride or proving you're stronger than Paolo, but because 3 people died and more will die if he's not stopped. Because that's justice, not murder. Justice and murder aren't always so different in my world. Then change your world. Lena pressed her forehead to his, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. Be better than Paolo. Be better than what people expect from a man like you, because I need to believe that the person I'm falling for is worth falling for. Victor's breath caught. Lena, don't! She pulled back, managing a trembling smile. Don't say anything you can't take back. Not yet. Not until this is over and we're both still alive to mean it. She saw everything he wanted to say written in his eyes. Confessions and promises and fears he couldn't voice with an audience. Instead, he just kissed her, hard and desperate and achingly gentle, like she was the only solid thing in a world spinning out of control. When they broke apart, Victor's mask was back in place, cool, controlled, the king ready for war. Marcus, take her to the lake house. Full security detail, no exceptions. Catherine, James, I want hourly updates on Paolo's movements. And someone get me the DA on the phone. It's time to call in some favors. The room exploded into coordinated chaos as Victor's people mobilized for war. Lena found herself swept up in the momentum, Marcus already guiding her toward a waiting vehicle, a team of 4 guards materializing to escort her. Wait, Lena called back to Victor, who'd already turned back to his war council. Victor! He stopped, looking back at her with an expression that was part hope, part heartbreak. Don't die, Lena said simply. Whatever happens, whatever you have to do, don't die, because I'm not done with you yet. Victor's smile was sad and beautiful and absolutely devastating. 48 hours, Lena, then I'm all yours. If we both survive, Lena thought, but didn't say. If there's anything left of us to salvage when the smoke clears. Marcus's hand on her elbow was gentle but insistent. Lena let herself be led away from the war room and the planning and Victor's dangerous promise to end this whatever the cost. She looked back once to see him silhouetted against the screens and maps and evidence of conspiracy, looking every inch the king he'd claimed to be. And Lena prayed, to whatever power might be listening in a godless world, that the man she'd fallen for would survive the war he was about to wage, even if surviving meant becoming something neither of them could forgive. The lake house was exactly what Marcus had promised, isolated, fortified, and utterly lonely. It sat on 3 acres of wooded property 2 hours outside Chicago, surrounded by tall fences and security cameras that tracked every movement. The interior was comfortable but impersonal, like a hotel room decorated by someone who'd never lived there. Lena's guards were professional and polite, maintaining respectful distance while making it clear she wasn't leaving. 2 stationed outside, 1 monitoring security feeds, 1 doing regular perimeter checks. They rotated in shifts, never letting their attention waver, and Lena found their constant vigilance both reassuring and suffocating. The first few hours passed in a haze of nervous energy. Lena paced the house, memorizing every room, every window, every potential exit, even though she had no intention of using them. She wasn't a prisoner, she reminded herself. She was being protected. There was a difference. It didn't feel like one. By nightfall, isolation started to weigh on her. No phone meant no updates, no way to know if Victor was safe, if the plan was working, if Paolo had made another move. The not knowing was worse than any threat, her imagination conjuring disasters in vivid detail. What if the port operation went wrong? What if Paolo ambushed Victor's team? What if right now, at this very moment, the man she'd fallen for was bleeding out in some warehouse while she sat safe and useless hours away? You should eat something. Lena looked up to find Sarah, one of her guards, standing in the doorway with a plate of food Lena hadn't ordered. The woman was maybe 30, athletic and alert, with kind eyes that suggested she understood exactly what Lena was going through. Not hungry, Lena said automatically. Eat anyway. Victor's orders were clear. Keep you safe and healthy. That includes making sure you don't starve yourself with worry. Sarah set the plate down on the coffee table. He'll be fine, you know. Victor Hale didn't get where he is by being careless. He also didn't get there by being in love with someone who makes him vulnerable. Lena picked at the food without interest. Paolo will use that. Use me. Only if he can reach you, which he can't. Sarah settled into a nearby chair, her weapon visible but not threatening. I've worked for Victor for 3 years, seen him face down rival families, federal investigations, internal betrayals. Never seen him rattled. Not once. And now? Now he's terrified. Because for the first time in his life, he has something to lose that matters more than power, or money, or reputation. Sarah's expression softened. That makes him dangerous, Lena. To Paolo, to anyone who gets between him and keeping you safe. But it also makes him human, and humanity can be a strength, not just a weakness. Lena wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that love could be an asset in a world built on violence and betrayal. But she'd seen the coldness in Victor's eyes when he talked about ending Paolo, the absolute certainty that he would do terrible things without hesitation. How much humanity could survive that kind of brutality? The hours crawled past with excruciating slowness. Lena tried to sleep but couldn't, tried to read but the words blurred together, tried to paint with supplies Sarah had thoughtfully provided, but her hands shook too badly to hold a brush steady. She was trapped in a limbo of waiting, every minute feeling like an hour, every sound outside sending her heart racing. Somewhere out there, war was being waged on her behalf. Blood was being spilled, lives were being ruined, and she could do nothing but sit in this beautiful prison and pray that when it was over, there would still be something left worth saving. Dawn came gray and cold, filtering through the windows with reluctant light. Lena had dozed fitfully on the couch, nightmares of fire and explosions jerking her awake every few hours. She felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Sarah appeared with coffee and a sympathetic expression. Still no word, but that's actually good news. Means everything's going according to plan. Or everyone's dead and nobody can report back, Lena said, immediately regretting the words when Sarah flinched. Sorry, I didn't mean... It's okay. You're scared. That's normal. Sarah handed her the coffee. But Victor promised you 48 hours. He doesn't break promises, especially not to you. Lena clung to that thought like a lifeline, replaying every moment she'd spent with Victor, every word, every touch. The way he'd looked at her in the diner like she was a miracle he didn't deserve. The way he'd caught her when she jumped, his arms steel and safety all at once. The way he'd kissed her like she was oxygen and he was drowning. He wouldn't break his promise. He would come back to her. He had to. The knock on the door came just after noon, sharp and urgent. Lena's guards immediately went on high alert, weapons drawn, coordinating in terse whispers. Sarah motioned for Lena to get down, to move away from the windows, her expression grimly professional. Federal agents, a voice called from outside. We need to speak with Lena Carter. Lena's blood turned to ice. Federal agents? Here? How did they even know where to find her? Through the security monitor, she watched as Sarah checked the credentials of the two people at the door. A man and woman in FBI windbreakers, badges prominently displayed. They looked legitimate, but Lena had learned enough in the past few days to know that appearances could be deceiving. Sarah spoke into her radio, presumably checking with Victor's people, her expression skeptical. After a tense minute, she nodded and holstered her weapon. They're legitimate, she told Lena. Victor gave them this location, but I'm staying in the room and my team stays on alert. Understood? The agents nodded their agreement, and Sarah opened the door to admit them. The woman stepped forward first, extending her hand to Lena with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ms. Carter, I'm Special Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI. This is my partner, Agent Michael Chen. We need to ask you some questions about Victor Hale and Paolo Castellano. Lena's stomach sank. This was it, the moment where everything she'd tried to avoid came crashing down. The feds were investigating, connecting dots, and she was right in the middle of it all. Am I under arrest? Lena asked, proud of how steady her voice sounded. No, you're a witness, potentially a victim. Agent Torres settled into a chair, pulling out a tablet and stylus. We're investigating the fire at your apartment building, the bombing at the television station, and several other incidents involving both Victor Hale and Paolo Castellano. Your cooperation would be extremely helpful. My lawyer isn't here, Lena said carefully, remembering Diana's warnings about talking to law enforcement. You don't need a lawyer if you haven't done anything wrong, Agent Chen said, his tone friendly but with an edge underneath. We're just trying to establish a timeline. protect you from becoming more deeply involved in a criminal conspiracy. The implication was clear: cooperate now or face charges later. Lena looked at Sarah, who gave the tiniest shake of her head, a warning to be careful. What do you want to know? Lena asked. Agent Torres activated her tablet, stylus poised. Let's start with how you met Victor Hale. For the next hour, Lena walked the agents through her story. The diner, the flirting, Victor's warning, the fire, everything that had led to this moment. She stuck to facts, avoided speculation, and absolutely did not mention the war room or the coordinated takedown of Paolo's empire currently unfolding across Chicago. The agents asked pointed questions about Victor's business, his associates, his activities. Lena pleaded ignorance truthfully. She genuinely didn't know the details of his empire, had never been involved in his operations before the past few days. And your relationship with Mr. Hale, Agent Torres pressed. Would you characterize it as romantic? Lena hesitated, knowing the answer could be used against both of them. I care about him. He saved my life multiple times. What we are beyond that... She stopped, not knowing how to finish. I don't know yet. But you're staying with him voluntarily, under his protection, living in properties he controls. Where else would I go? My home burned down. The man who destroyed it has promised to torture me to death if Victor doesn't surrender to his demands. Lena let anger creep into her voice. I'm not Victor's accomplice, Agent Torres. I'm his victim and Paolo Castellano's target. There's a difference. Agent Torres and Chen exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Torres nodded and set down her tablet. Ms. Carter, I'm going to be frank with you. Victor Hale is under investigation for racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, and about a dozen other federal crimes. We've been building a case for 2 years, and in the past 48 hours, we've received more evidence against him and Paolo Castellano than we gathered in the previous 24 months combined. Lena's breath caught. Victor had done it. Fed the feds enough information to bring down Paolo while somehow protecting himself. Convenient timing, Agent Chen observed, watching Lena's reaction carefully. Almost like someone wanted us focused on Castellano specifically. I wouldn't know anything about that, Lena said. I'm sure you wouldn't. Agent Torres stood, smoothing her jacket. Here's what's going to happen. In the next few hours, we're executing warrants on 17 Paolo Castellano properties. We'll be making arrests, seizing assets, freezing accounts. It's going to be the biggest organized crime bust in Chicago history. Good, Lena said honestly. He murdered 3 people in that fire. He deserves prison. He does. But Victor Hale isn't much better, Ms. Carter. The difference between them is just a matter of degree, not kind. Don't mistake one devil for an angel just because he saved you from another devil. The words hit harder than Lena wanted to admit, echoing her own fears and doubts. Was she really any different from countless other women who'd fallen for dangerous men, who'd convinced themselves that love could redeem violence? Are we done? Lena asked quietly. For now. But we'll need you to testify when this goes to trial, both against Castellano and, potentially, against Hale. Agent Torres's expression softened slightly. I know you care about him, but the law is the law and you're going to have to choose a side eventually. After the agents left, Lena sat in silence, their warning echoing in her head. Choose a side. As if it were that simple. As if love and justice existed in neat, separate categories instead of bleeding together into shades of gray that defied easy definition. Sarah appeared with fresh coffee, her expression carefully neutral. You handled that well. Didn't give them anything they didn't already know. They're going to arrest him eventually, aren't they? Even if Paolo goes down first. Maybe. Probably. Sarah shrugged. But Victor survived worse, and he's got enough lawyers and leverage to tie up any investigation for years. He'll be fine. Lena wanted to believe that, but fine felt like a low bar for the man who'd promised her 48 hours, who'd sworn to come back to her whole and human despite the darkness he was about to wade through. The hours continued their cruel crawl toward whatever ending Victor was orchestrating. Lena paced, worried, and tried not to think about federal agents executing warrants, about violence erupting across the city, about the possibility that she'd never see Victor Hale alive again. When the sun finally set on the second day, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked too much like fire, Lena stood at the window and whispered a prayer she didn't quite believe in, that love could be stronger than violence, that good could triumph even when wielded by imperfect hands, that 48 hours might somehow lead to forever instead of just another funeral. And in the darkness gathering outside, Chicago prepared for the reckoning Victor Hale had promised, for the end of an empire and the birth of something new, forged in ashes, baptized in blood, and carried forward by two people who should never have met but could no longer imagine surviving apart. The war was reaching its crescendo, and Lena could only wait, hope, and trust that when the smoke cleared, there would still be someone left to love. The phone finally rang at 11:47 p.m., exactly 48 hours after Victor's promise. Lena lunged for it before Sarah could intercept, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. "Victor? It's done." His voice sounded wrong, flat, exhausted, stripped of everything that made it his. "Paolo's in federal custody. His entire organization is dismantled. The war is over." Relief and terror crashed through Lena in equal measure. He was alive. He'd survived. But the deadness in his voice suggested he'd paid a price she couldn't yet see. "Are you hurt?" Lena asked, gripping the phone so hard her knuckles went white. "No, I'm coming to get you. Be ready in 20 minutes. "Victor, wait." But he'd already hung up. Sarah was already coordinating with the security team, preparing for Victor's arrival with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Lena stood frozen in the middle of the living room, trying to reconcile the broken voice on the phone with the confident, controlled man she'd left 48 hours ago. It's done. The war is over. Paolo's in custody. They'd won. Victor had orchestrated the impossible, destroyed his enemy without becoming a casualty himself. So why did victory sound so much like defeat? Headlights cut through the darkness exactly 20 minutes later, twin beams announcing Victor's arrival. Lena was already at the door, Sarah's warnings about protocol forgotten. Her entire focus narrowed to the figure emerging from the black Mercedes. Victor looked like he'd aged a decade. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained, his face haggard with exhaustion that went deeper than lack of sleep. But his eyes, those were what stopped Lena's breath. They were the eyes of a man who'd seen hell and wasn't sure he'd fully returned. "Victor," Lena breathed, closing the distance between them. He caught her in his arms, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him upright. His face buried in her hair, his breathing uneven, and Lena felt him shaking. This man who ruled Chicago with iron control, reduced to trembling at the simple act of holding her. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "I promised." Victor's voice was muffled, raw. 48 hours. "I promised." They stood there in the cold night air, clinging to each other while Sarah and the security team maintained respectful distance. Lena felt the weight of whatever Victor had done pressing down on him, threatening to crush him, and she held tighter, willing her strength into him through sheer force of will. "Come inside," she finally said. "Tell me what happened." Victor let her guide him into the lake house, his movements mechanical, like he was operating on autopilot. Sarah discreetly withdrew with her team, giving them privacy, and Lena found herself alone with a man who looked like a stranger wearing Victor's face. "Talk to me," Lena urged, leading him to the couch. "What did you do?" "Everything necessary." Victor's laugh was bitter. "Everything I swore I'd never do again." He told her in fragments, the story coming out disjointed and harsh. The port operation had gone perfectly. Coast Guard intercepted the shipment, 40 million in cocaine seized, 3 of Paolo's top lieutenants arrested on the spot. The photographs went live at dawn, every major news outlet running stories about corrupt politicians and judges on Paolo's payroll. By noon, the politicians were scrambling to resign, the judges were suspended, and Paolo's protective shield evaporated. "The FBI hit his properties at 3 p.m., Victor continued, his voice mechanical. 17 locations simultaneously. Found enough evidence to put him away for 5 lifetimes. Money laundering, drug trafficking, human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder. They had everything." "That's good," Lena said carefully. "That's what we wanted." It should have been enough. Victor's hands clenched into fists. Paolo should have surrendered when he saw it was over, but he didn't. He ran. Lena's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "He went after my people. Shot Marcus in a parking garage. Vest saved him, but barely. Put a bomb in Catherine's car. She was smart enough to spot it, got the bomb squad there in time, sent men to James's apartment to execute him in front of his family. Victor's voice cracked. James fought back, killed 2 of them before backup arrived. But his wife saw it all. His 8-year-old daughter saw it all. Oh God, Victor. That's when I knew talking was over, that Paolo would rather burn the entire city down than accept defeat. Victor looked at Lena with haunted eyes. So I made a choice, the kind I swore I'd left behind years ago. Lena's throat tightened. What choice? Victor stood abruptly, pacing to the windows like he couldn't bear to look at her while he spoke. I found him, tracked him to a warehouse on the south side where he was planning to regroup, to hit back at everyone who'd betrayed him. I went in alone, no backup, no witnesses, just me and Paolo and everything between us. Victor, you could have been killed. I almost was. He had 6 men with him, all armed, all ready to die for him, but they weren't ready to face someone with nothing left to lose. Victor's reflection in the window was ghostly, insubstantial. I killed 3 of them. The others ran, and then it was just me and Paolo, exactly like I'd wanted. Lena's hands shook. She'd known this moment would come, known that Victor would have to cross lines to end the war, but hearing it described in his flat, dead voice made it real in a way she hadn't been prepared for. Did you kill him? She whispered. No. Victor turned to face her. I wanted to. I had him on his knees, gun to his head, every reason in the world to pull the trigger. 3 innocent people dead. My people targeted. You hunted like an animal. I could have ended it right there. Why didn't you? Because I heard your voice in my head. Victor's expression was raw with pain and something that might have been hope. You asked me to be better than Paolo, to choose justice over murder, to remember why I was doing this. He crossed back to her, dropping to his knees in front of the couch so they were eye level. So I called the FBI, waited with him until they arrived, handed him over alive with enough evidence to convict him 10 times over. I chose the hard way because you believed I could be better than what I was. Tears streamed down Lena's face as she reached out to cup Victor's cheeks, seeing the toll that choice had cost him, written in every line of exhaustion, every shadow under his eyes. You did the right thing, did I? Those 3 men I killed to get to Paolo, they had families, lives. They were following orders, same as my people. I ended them without hesitation because they stood between me and what I wanted. Victor's voice broke. How is that justice, Lena? How is that being better? Because you stopped when you could have kept going. Because when it mattered most, when you had every excuse to become the monster everyone expects, you chose something harder. Lena pulled him up onto the couch beside her, holding his face so he had to meet her eyes. You chose me. You chose us. You chose the possibility that maybe violence doesn't have to be the only answer. People still died because of me. People died because Paolo Castellanos started a war. You just ended it. Lena's voice was fierce. Those 3 men? They made choices too. They chose to work for a terrorist, to follow orders they knew were wrong, to point guns at innocent people. You gave them a chance to surrender. They chose to fight. Their blood isn't on your hands, Victor. It's on Paolo's. Victor searched her face like he was looking for absolution she wasn't sure she could give. How can you still look at me like that? Like I'm someone worth saving? Because you are. Because the man I fell for isn't the one who killed 3 people in a warehouse. He's the one who caught me when I jumped, who held me through the night when I was terrified, who spent 48 hours dismantling an empire just to keep me safe. Lena's thumb brushed away the moisture gathering in Victor's eyes. That man is worth saving. That man is worth fighting for, even when he forgets it himself. Victor's control finally shattered. He pulled Lena into his arms and buried his face against her shoulder, his whole body shaking with exhaustion and relief and grief for choices that couldn't be unmade. Lena held him through it, this powerful man reduced to human proportions by the weight of everything he'd done, and whispered promises against his hair. I've got you. You're safe. We both are. The war is over. You came back to me. Everything else, we'll figure out together. They stayed like that as the hours crept toward dawn, 2 people who'd survived hell clinging to each other in the aftermath, trying to believe that love could be enough to carry them forward. That the foundation they'd built in ashes might somehow support the weight of an actual future. Eventually, Victor's breathing evened out, exhaustion finally claiming him. Lena guided him to the bedroom, helping him out of his ruined suit, cataloging the bruises and cuts that marked his body like a map of violence survived. He collapsed onto the bed without protest, and Lena curled around him, her arm protective across his chest. "Don't leave," Victor mumbled, already half asleep. "Never," Lena promised. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." She felt him relax into sleep, the tension finally draining from his body. And Lena lay awake in the darkness, watching the man she loved rest for the first time in days, and wondered what came next. The war was over. Paolo was in custody. But Agent Torres's warning echoed in her mind, that Victor would face his own reckoning eventually, that choosing him meant choosing a life on the edge of legality, that love couldn't erase the reality of who he was and what he'd built. Could she live with that? Could she love a man whose empire was built on fear and violence, who'd killed 3 people just days ago, who existed in a moral gray area that defied easy categorization? Looking at Victor's sleeping face, vulnerable and peaceful in a way he never was awake, Lena knew the answer had already been made. Not in the grand romantic gesture or the dramatic declaration, but in 1,000 small moments. Every time she'd chosen to stay instead of run, every time she'd looked past the monster and seen the man, every time she'd believed he could be better and given him the space to prove it, she'd already chosen him. The only question was whether they could build something real from the ruins of the war they'd survived. Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through unfamiliar windows. Lena woke to find Victor already awake, watching her with an expression that was part wonder, part disbelief, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey yourself." Victor's hand came up to trace her cheekbone, the gesture achingly tender. "I thought maybe I'd dreamed you, that the past 48 hours had broken something in my head and when I woke up you'd be gone." "I'm real. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Lena caught his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. "How do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but alive. That's something." Victor's expression grew serious. "Lena, we need to talk about what happens next. The FBI is going to want statements from both of us. The media is going to be relentless, and there are people in Paolo's organization who won't accept that it's over, who will want revenge for what I did." "I know." Lena sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. "Agent Torres came to see me yesterday. She told me I'd have to testify against Paolo. Maybe against you too, eventually." Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I expected that. Diana will help you prepare. You won't face them alone." "That's not what I'm worried about." Lena turned to face him fully. "I'm worried about what comes after the trials, after the testimony, after all of this is finally, truly over. What happens to us, Victor? Can we actually have a normal life? Or will we always be looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next threat?" It was the question neither of them had wanted to ask, the fear that had lurked beneath every kiss, every promise. They'd survived the war, but survival didn't guarantee a future worth living. Victor was quiet for a long moment, his hand finding hers, fingers intertwining. "I don't know if I can give you normal, Lena. My business, legitimate and otherwise, will always carry risks. There will always be people who want what I have, who see you as a weakness to exploit. I can minimize those risks, can build walls and higher security, and do everything in my power to keep you safe, but I can't promise you suburban peace and total anonymity. I'm not asking for suburban peace." Lena squeezed his hand. "I'm asking if you can give me honesty, partnership, the knowledge that we're building something together instead of me just existing in the margins of your world." "What did you have in mind?" Lena took a breath, the idea that had been forming in her mind crystallizing into words. "I want my art gallery, the one I was saving for before my apartment burned down. I want to create something beautiful in this city, something that has nothing to do with violence or crime or war. I want to prove that Chicago can be more than just mob territories and corruption." Victor's expression shifted to something Lena couldn't quite read. "You want to start over, build something new. I want us to start over together. You said you've been trying to go legitimate, to move away from the darker parts of your empire. So do it. Invest in the city instead of controlling it. Build instead of destroy. And let me build beside you, not as your protected liability, but as your partner. That's ambitious. Victor's lip quirked. Also completely insane. Do you have any idea how hard it is to walk away from this life? How many enemies I've made who won't just let me retire peacefully? Then don't retire. Transform. Lena's voice grew stronger, more certain. You proved in the past 48 hours that you're brilliant at strategy, at coordinating complex operations, at getting people to work toward a common goal. Use those skills for something that doesn't end in bloodshed. And when the threats come, because they will come, we face them together, as partners, as equals. Victor studied her for a long moment, and Lena saw him wrestling with the possibility she was offering. A different kind of power, a different kind of empire, one built on creation instead of fear. You make it sound possible, he finally said. It is possible, if we choose it, if we're both willing to fight for it as hard as we fought against Paolo. Lena moved closer, her free hand coming up to rest against Victor's chest where his heart beat steady and strong. I'm not naive, Victor. I know there will be hard days, dangerous days, days when we question every choice that brought us here. But I also know that what we have, this thing that started with coffee and flirting and grew into something strong enough to survive fire and bombs and war, that's worth fighting for. You're remarkable, Victor breathed. Absolutely, terrifyingly remarkable. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, Victor kissed her, deep and slow and full of promise. It tasted like hope and coffee, and the beginning of something neither of them could fully imagine yet. When they broke apart, Victor's eyes were bright with something Lena hadn't seen before. Genuine, unguarded joy. Yes, he said simply. Yes to the gallery, yes to partnership, yes to building something new together. Yes to all of it, Lena. On one condition. What condition? You let me help make your dreams bigger than you ever imagined. You wanted one gallery? I'll give you 3. You wanted to show your art in Logan Square? We'll make you the centerpiece of Chicago's art scene. You wanted to prove this city can be more than violence? Victor's smile was fierce and beautiful and absolutely devastating. We'll transform it together, build an empire worth leaving behind. Lena's breath caught. This was more than she'd dared to hope for, more than seemed possible just days ago when she'd been a waitress serving coffee to strangers. That's a big promise. I'm a man who keeps his promises. 48 hours, remember? How could I forget? Lena kissed him again, softer this time, sealing the promise between them. When do we start? As soon as you're ready, but first, Victor's expression grew serious again. First, we deal with the immediate aftermath. The FBI wants statements today. Diana needs to prep you for testimony, and we need to make a public appearance, show Chicago that we're not hiding, that we survived and we're moving forward. A public appearance? Victor, is that safe? Safe? No. Necessary? Yes. Victor stood, pulling on clothes with renewed energy that suggested the conversation had restored something essential in him. Paolo's arrest is all over the news. The entire city is watching to see what happens next. If we hide, we look guilty. But if we walk out together, heads high, and announce our plans to invest in Chicago's future, that's a statement no one can ignore. What kind of statement? That the old ways are over. That Chicago deserves better than mob wars and corruption. The 2 people who should have been casualties of violence chose to build something beautiful instead. Victor held out his hand to her. That love can be stronger than fear, if we're brave enough to believe it. Lena took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet, and saw their future reflected in his eyes. It wouldn't be easy. There would be trials and testimony and threats from people who wanted revenge or power or both. There would be investigations and reporters and judgment from those who couldn't understand how a waitress and a mob boss could possibly build something legitimate. But they would face it together, as partners, as equals, as 2 people who'd survived hell and came out the other side still believing in the possibility of hope. The next few hours passed in controlled chaos. Diana arrived with legal documents and media strategy, walking both of them through what to expect from the FBI interviews. Marcus showed up with a medical kit, insisting on checking Victor's injuries despite his protests. Catherine called with updates on the various members of Victor's organization. Everyone was accounted for, injuries treated, and surprisingly, morale was high. They're calling you a genius, Catherine reported over speakerphone. The way you took down Paolo without triggering a full-scale war, without getting any of our people killed, they're saying it's the smartest operation they've ever seen. 3 men are dead, Catherine. That's not genius. That's failure. Victor's voice was tight. 3 of Paolo's soldiers who were actively trying to kill you, and you gave them a chance to surrender first. That's restraint, boss. More than Paolo ever showed anyone. Catherine paused. The word is already spreading. Other families are taking note. You ended this clean, professional, without unnecessary bloodshed. That's the kind of leadership that gets respect. After Catherine hung up, Lena touched Victor's arm gently. She's right, you know. You made hard choices, but you made them as carefully as possible. That counts for something. Does it count for enough? Victor asked quietly. For me, it does. For the future we're building? Yes, it's enough. The FBI interviews were exactly as grueling as Diana had warned. Agent Torres and Chen asked the same questions 17 different ways, looking for inconsistencies, for admissions that could be used against either of them. Lena stuck to her story, the truth, as straightforward as she could tell it, and watched Diana intercept the questions that ventured too far into speculation or assumption. Victor's interview took longer, the agents clearly frustrated that they couldn't find the smoking gun they needed to charge him alongside Paolo. But Victor had been careful, had made sure every action he took existed in legal gray areas, and his lawyers were better than their investigators. When it was finally over, Agent Torres pulled Lena aside one last time. You're making a mistake, the agent said bluntly. Victor Hale is charming and he saved your life, but he's still a criminal. He's still dangerous. And the moment you stop being useful to him, you'll find out exactly how dangerous. With respect, Agent Torres, you don't know him like I do. Lena met her eyes steadily. I'm not some naive girl who thinks love conquers all. I know who Victor is, what he's done, the world he comes from, but I also know who he's trying to become. And I believe people deserve the chance to be better than their worst choices. Even when those choices include murder? Especially then. Because if we don't believe people can change, what's the point of justice? What's the point of prison or rehabilitation or second chances? Lena's voice was firm. Victor killed 3 men who were trying to kill him. He handed Paolo over to you alive when he could have executed him. He's cooperating with your investigation. That has to count for something. Agent Torres looked like she wanted to argue, but finally just shook her head. I hope you're right, Ms. Carter, for your sake. Because if you're wrong, the next time we meet, it'll be at your funeral. The warning should have shaken Lena, should have planted seeds of doubt about the choice she was making. Instead, it just strengthened her resolve. She'd survived fire and bombs and assassination attempts. She'd jumped off a burning building and lived. She'd looked into the darkness Victor inhabited and chosen to stand beside him anyway. She wasn't afraid anymore. The press conference was scheduled for 6 p.m., giving them just enough time to prepare. Diana had assembled a small army of stylists, media consultants, and security personnel, all working to present Victor and Lena as the face of Chicago's new future. Lena found herself in an elegant navy dress that somehow managed to look both professional and approachable. Her hair styled in soft waves, makeup subtle but polished. She looked like someone important, someone worth listening to, and it felt strange and empowering all at once. Victor appeared in a charcoal suit that made him look every inch the legitimate businessman he was trying to become. But his eyes, when he looked at Lena, were warm and proud and full of something that made her heart skip. You're beautiful, he said simply. You're not so bad yourself. Lena adjusted his tie, the domestic gesture feeling oddly normal despite the cameras waiting outside. Are we really doing this? Going public with everything? We are. Together. Victor took her hands, his grip steady and sure. I've spent 15 years building power in the shadows, making people afraid to speak my name out loud. It's time to step into the light. Show Chicago that monsters can choose to be men, that empires built on fear can transform into something better. No pressure or anything, Lena said with a shaky laugh. Just tell the truth, that's all anyone can ask. Victor pressed a kiss to her forehead. Ready? Lena took a deep breath, thinking about the woman she'd been just weeks ago, serving coffee, dreaming small, playing it safe. That woman wouldn't have recognized the person standing here now, about to face cameras and questions and judgment from an entire city. But that woman had never jumped off a burning building, had never fallen for a king, had never discovered that sometimes the most dangerous choice was also the most honest one. "Ready," Lena said. "Let's show them what we're made of." They walked into the press room hand in hand, facing a wall of cameras and reporters, and questions shouted from every direction. Diana stepped up to the microphone first, calling for order, explaining the ground rules. Then Victor took the podium, and the room fell silent. "My name is Victor Hale, and I'm here to make an announcement about Chicago's future," he began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded respect through fear, but now sought it through different means. For too long, this city has been divided by violence and corruption. Families like the Castellanos have terrorized innocent people, destroyed lives, and made Chicago synonymous with organized crime. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I'm here to say that ends now. Paulo Castellano is in federal custody, facing charges that will put him away for the rest of his life. His organization is dismantled, and I'm committing every resource I have to making sure nothing like this happens again." Reporters erupted with questions, but Victor held up a hand. "I know what you're thinking. Why should anyone trust me? I've operated in Chicago's gray areas for years. I've made enemies and choices I'm not proud of. But the past few weeks have shown me that power without purpose is just violence, and I'm done with violence." He reached out, and Lena stepped up beside him, her hand finding his. "This is Lena Carter. Some of you know her as the victim of the Lincoln Park fire, the woman whose apartment Paulo Castellano destroyed to get to me. But she's so much more than that. She's an artist, a dreamer, and the reason I'm standing here today choosing a different path." Lena's heart pounded as cameras focused on her, but Victor's hand was steady in hers, grounding her. "Together, we're announcing the Lena Carter Arts Initiative," Victor continued, "a $50 million investment in Chicago's art community. We're opening 3 galleries across the city, creating grant programs for emerging artists, and establishing a foundation dedicated to proving that Chicago can be known for beauty instead of bloodshed." The reporters exploded with questions again, but Victor wasn't finished. "This isn't charity. This isn't public relations. This is a commitment to the city that's been my home for 40 years, a promise that the next generation of Chicagoans will inherit something better than what we had. And it starts now, with 2 people who should have been casualties of war choosing to build something beautiful instead." He turned to Lena, his eyes asking silent permission. She nodded, and together they faced the cameras. "We're also announcing our engagement," Victor said, and the room erupted into chaos. Lena's head spun. Engagement. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't planned. But then Victor was looking at her with absolute certainty, and Lena understood. This was him, showing the world that she mattered, that they mattered, that this wasn't just a business partnership or a strategic alliance, but something real and permanent and worth fighting for. "Lena Carter has shown me that people can choose to be better than their worst moments," Victor said, his voice carrying over the shouting reporters. "That love can be stronger than fear, that 2 people from completely different worlds can find common ground and build something extraordinary. She survived fire because of me, was hunted because of me, nearly died because I let her into my life. And instead of running, instead of hating me for what I cost her, she chose to stay, to believe I could be more than what I was. That's the kind of courage Chicago needs. That's the kind of hope we're investing in." He pulled a small box from his pocket. When had he gotten that? And dropped to one knee right there in front of God and cameras and all of Chicago. "Lena Carter, will you marry me? Will you build this new empire with me? Will you show this city that monsters can become men if someone loves them enough to believe it?" Lena looked down at Victor Hale, king of Chicago's underworld, survivor of a war he'd started to protect her, the man who'd caught her when she jumped and held her through the darkness, and saw their entire future laid out before them. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be simple. There would be trials and threats, and people who would never believe they deserved happiness. But they would face it together, as partners, as equals, as 2 people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes. "Yes," Lena said, her voice strong and clear and absolutely certain. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build with you. Yes to all of it, Victor, today and every day after." Victor slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple band of platinum with a diamond that caught the light like hope crystallized, and stood to kiss her in front of everyone. The cameras flashed like lightning, capturing the moment for posterity, and Lena heard the reporters shouting questions she couldn't begin to answer. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was this: Victor's arms around her, his heart beating against hers, and the promise they'd just made to a city that desperately needed to believe in redemption. When they finally broke apart, Diana was at the microphone fielding questions, Marcus and the security team creating a protective perimeter, and the world was moving forward with or without their permission. Victor leaned down to whisper in Lena's ear. "I probably should have asked in private first." "Probably," Lena agreed, unable to stop smiling. "But this was better, more honest. No hiding, no secrets. Just us, choosing each other in front of everyone." "No regrets?" Lena looked at the ring on her finger, at the cameras still flashing, at the future spreading out before them full of possibility and danger and hope. "Not a single one." They left the press conference an hour later, exhausted and exhilarated and ready to start the next chapter. The war was over. Paolo was in custody, and two people who should have been destroyed by violence had instead chosen to transform it into something beautiful. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There would be trials ahead, testimony to give, threats to face, and choices to make that would test everything they'd built. But they would face it together, as partners, proving that sometimes the most dangerous love was also the truest. And as they drove through Chicago's streets toward whatever came next, Lena leaned against Victor's shoulder and whispered a final promise into the darkness. "Whatever comes, we survive it together. No more hiding, no more fear, just us, building something worth fighting for." Victor's arm tightened around her. "Together," he agreed. "Always together." The city lights blurred past the windows, painting their future in shades of possibility. And for the first time since the fire, since the terror, since her entire world had gone up in flames, Lena felt truly, completely safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because she'd found someone worth facing danger beside. And that made all the difference. The trial began 8 months later on a crisp autumn morning that painted Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and amber. Lena stood outside the federal courthouse in a charcoal suit that Diana had insisted projected both strength and credibility, her engagement ring catching the sunlight as she gripped Victor's hand. Reporters swarmed the steps, cameras tracking their every movement, but the chaos felt different now. Manageable, familiar, something they'd learned to navigate together. "Ready?" Victor asked, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in the soothing rhythm that had become their silent language over the past months. "As ready as I'll ever be to testify against a man who tried to kill me," Lena said, managing a tight smile. "You?" "I've faced worse." But his jaw was tense, his eyes scanning the crowd with the wariness of someone who knew threats could come from anywhere. Marcus and his security team maintained their perimeter, subtle but ever present, a reminder that safety was still something they had to actively construct rather than take for granted. Inside, the courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and the curious public who'd been following the case since the dramatic press conference. Paolo Castellanos sat at the defense table flanked by 3 expensive lawyers, his expression carefully neutral, but Lena caught the flash of rage in his eyes when she entered. He'd lost everything: his empire, his freedom, his reputation, and he blamed her for all of it. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, financial records documenting decades of money laundering, testimony from lieutenants who'd turned state's evidence, forensic evidence from the fire that had destroyed Lena's building. They had Paolo on racketeering, conspiracy, drug trafficking, and 3 counts of murder for Mrs. Chen, Thomas Rodriguez, and Sarah Brennan. But the prosecution's star witness was Lena herself. When they called her to the stand, her legs felt unsteady, her hands clammy despite the courtroom's climate control. She'd practiced this testimony 100 times with Diana, knew every question and every answer by heart. But facing Paolo across the courtroom, seeing the cold calculation in his eyes, brought everything rushing back. The smoke, the fear, the certainty that she was going to die. Victor caught her eye from the gallery, and she saw absolute faith reflected back at her. "You've got this," his expression said. "I'm right here." Lena took the oath and settled into the witness chair, her voice steady as she began recounting the nightmare that had started this all. She told them about the diner, about not knowing who Victor really was, about the warning that had come too late. She described waking to smoke and flames, the blocked fire escape, the terror of being trapped 4 stories up with fire consuming everything below. "And when you jumped," the prosecutor asked gently, "who caught you?" "Victor Hale," He was there within minutes. He saved my life. Lena's voice was clear, unwavering. If he hadn't come, I would have died with the others. The prosecutor displayed photographs from the fire scene, devastating images of the destroyed building, of firefighters battling the blaze, of victims being carried out in body bags. Lena felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. These people deserve more than her tears. They deserve justice. Ms. Carter, in your own words, tell the jury what impact this crime has had on your life. Lena took a breath and looked directly at the jury, 12 ordinary people who would decide Paulo's fate. I lost everything that night. My home, my belongings, years of artwork I'd created. But more than that, I lost my sense of safety. For months afterward, I couldn't sleep without nightmares. Couldn't be in enclosed spaces without panic attacks. Couldn't trust that tomorrow would come because I'd learned how quickly everything can burn. She paused, gathering strength. But I also learned something else. I learned that people can choose how they respond to violence. They can let it break them, or they can use it as fuel to build something better. Paulo Castellano chose to destroy. He chose to burn a building full of innocent people just to send a message. He chose terrorism over humanity, and 3 people died because of that choice. Thank you, Ms. Carter. No further questions. The defense attorney rose, a sharp-eyed woman who looked like she ate witnesses for breakfast. Ms. Carter, isn't it true that you benefited enormously from this tragedy? That your relationship with Victor Hale has provided you with wealth and opportunities you never would have had otherwise? Diana had warned Lena this attack would come. I benefited from Victor Hale's protection after Paulo Castellano tried to murder me. That's not the same thing. But you're engaged to Mr. Hale now. You're the face of his $50 million arts initiative. You've gone from serving coffee to running galleries in less than a year. Quite the upgrade. Quite the survival story, Lena corrected, her voice sharp. I didn't ask to be targeted. I didn't ask for my home to be destroyed or for 3 innocent people to die. What I asked for was justice. And if building something beautiful from that tragedy makes me guilty of something, then I'll accept that judgment. The defense attorney pressed harder, trying to paint Lena as an opportunist, as someone who'd manipulated Victor Hale for personal gain. But Lena held firm, her testimony unwavering, and she watched the jury's expressions shift from skepticism to sympathy. When she was finally dismissed, Lena's legs barely carried her back to her seat beside Victor. He caught her hand immediately, squeezing tight, his pride and relief palpable. "You were perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect." The trial continued for 3 more weeks. Victor testified about the attacks on his organization, about the car bombing, about finding Paulo planning further violence. His lawyers had coached him carefully on what he could and couldn't say, walking the razor's edge between cooperation and self-incrimination. Agent Torres testified about the evidence trail, the financial records, the coordination between federal agencies. Catherine, Marcus, and James all took the stand, describing the systematic campaign of terror Paulo had waged. But the moment that sealed Paulo's fate came from an unexpected source, his own nephew, Marco Castellano, who'd been arrested in the initial raids and agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. Marco described in devastating detail how Paulo had ordered the fire, how he'd personally selected the building because it would send the strongest message, how he'd laughed when told there might be civilian casualties because collateral damage makes the point stronger. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as Marco recounted his uncle's casual cruelty, his complete disregard for human life. Even Paulo's lawyers looked shaken. When the prosecution rested, the defense tried to salvage what they could, arguing that Paulo was being scapegoated, that the evidence was circumstantial, that Marco was lying to save himself. But the jury saw through it. They'd heard too much, seen too much evidence. Deliberations took only 6 hours. Lena sat beside Victor in the courtroom as the jury filed back in, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone could hear it. This was it. The moment that would determine whether 3 innocent deaths meant something, whether justice was more than just a word people used to feel better about an unfair world. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The foreperson stood, a middle-aged woman who'd taken careful notes throughout the trial. On the charge of racketeering, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant guilty. On 3 counts of felony murder, we find the defendant guilty. The litany continued, guilty on all 27 counts. Paolo's expression never changed, his lawyers immediately calling for appeals, but Lena felt something break loose in her chest. Relief and grief and vindication all tangled together in a knot she couldn't untangle. Victor's arm came around her shoulders, steady and sure. "It's over," he said quietly. "It's finally over." But it wasn't. Not yet. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over the trial with unflinching fairness, looked down at Paolo Castellano with something like pity mixed with contempt. "Mr. Castellano, you have been found guilty of crimes that shock the conscience. You ordered the destruction of a residential building, resulting in 3 innocent deaths. You orchestrated a campaign of terror against law-abiding citizens. You corrupted public officials and subverted the very institutions meant to protect this city." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "You have shown no remorse, no recognition of the harm you've caused. Therefore, this court sentences you to 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, plus 240 years for the remaining counts." Paolo stood impassively as the sentence was read, but Lena saw his hands clench on the table, the only sign that the reality had finally penetrated his armor. "This case," the judge continued, "represents everything wrong with organized crime in America. But it also represents hope that our justice system can still function, that evidence and truth can prevail over intimidation and violence. To the victims and their families, I offer my deepest condolences. To Ms. Carter and the others who survived, I commend your courage in testifying. And to this city," the judge's gaze swept the packed courtroom, "may this verdict remind us all that no one is above the law." As guards led Paolo away in chains, he looked directly at Lena one final time. She saw hatred there, yes, but also something else, the dawning realization that he'd lost everything while she'd survived and even thrived, that his attempt to destroy her had backfired spectacularly. Lena met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away, and watched as Paolo Castellano disappeared through the courtroom doors for the last time, his empire reduced to ashes, his legacy nothing but a cautionary tale. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed them immediately, shouting questions about the verdict, about their wedding plans, about the arts initiative. Diana had prepared a statement, but Victor gestured for the microphone himself. "Justice was served today," he said simply. 3 innocent people, Mrs. Chen, Thomas Rodriguez, and Sarah Brennan, can finally rest knowing their deaths weren't ignored or forgotten. Paolo Castellano will spend the rest of his life in prison, and Chicago can begin healing from the damage he caused. He looked at Lena, his expression softening. "As for us, we're doing exactly what we promised, building something beautiful from the ashes, creating a future worth believing in." "Mr. Hale, there are still rumors about your own criminal activities. Will you be facing charges?" Victor's smile was tight. "I've cooperated fully with federal investigators. I've provided testimony and evidence that helped dismantle one of Chicago's most dangerous criminal organizations. I'm transforming my business holdings into legitimate enterprises and investing in this city's future. If prosecutors want to go after me despite all that, they're welcome to try. But I think they'll find I'm more valuable as an ally than an enemy." It was a calculated risk, throwing down that gauntlet, but Lena knew Agent Torres and her team were caught in a bind. Victor had given them Paolo Castellano on a silver platter. His testimony had been crucial to securing the conviction. And his cooperation had exposed corruption throughout Chicago's political and judicial systems, leading to a dozen additional investigations. Going after him now would be politically complicated and legally difficult, especially when he was actively working to go legitimate. The feds would have to decide if revenge was worth more than the devil they'd already caged. 3 months later, word came down that the FBI was closing its investigation into Victor Hale's activities. Insufficient evidence, they claimed, though everyone knew it was more complicated than that. Victor had played the game perfectly, giving them enough to take down a real monster while protecting himself through careful legal maneuvering and powerful allies. "You got away with it," Lena said when Diana delivered the news, her tone somewhere between admiration and disbelief. "I got a second chance," Victor corrected. "There's a difference." And he'd been using that second chance well. Over the past year, Victor had systematically dismantled the shadier parts of his empire, selling off illegal operations, cutting ties with questionable partners, and reinvesting in legitimate businesses. Construction companies, real estate development, technology startups. He was building a new kind of power, one that didn't require violence to maintain. It wasn't perfect. There were still gray areas, still connections to his old life that couldn't be completely severed. But he was trying, genuinely trying, and Lena saw the toll it took, the stress of walking away from everything he'd known, the fear that his past would eventually catch up, the constant vigilance required to stay one step ahead of enemies who'd love to see him fall. But he was doing it. For her. For them. For the future they'd promised to build together. The first Lena Carter Gallery opened in Logan Square on a brilliant spring morning exactly 1 year after the fire. The space was everything Lena had dreamed of. High ceilings, perfect lighting, walls that seemed to glow with possibility. Her paintings hung throughout, bold and beautiful and unapologetically honest, depicting Chicago in all its contradictions, shadow and light, violence and hope, destruction and rebirth. The opening reception drew hundreds of people. Art collectors, journalists, community leaders, and ordinary Chicagoans who'd followed Lena's story and wanted to support her vision. Victor stayed close but let her shine, watching with undisguised pride as she talked about her work, as she connected with admirers, as she transformed from scared waitress to confident artist before his eyes. Rosa from the diner showed up with tears in her eyes, pulling Lena into a fierce hug. "Look at you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew you'd make it. I knew you were meant for something bigger than coffee and scrambled eggs." "I couldn't have done it without you," Lena said honestly. "You warned me about Victor, tried to protect me." "And you ignored me completely," Rosa laughed. "Turned out okay, though. Better than okay." Marcus approached with Catherine and James, Victor's core team who'd become something like family over the past year. James's daughter was with him, a shy 8-year-old who'd been in therapy since witnessing her father kill 2 men in their apartment. She'd made remarkable progress, and seeing her smile at the colorful paintings gave Lena hope that children could heal from trauma if given the right support. "Boss wanted me to tell you something," Marcus said, his scarred face almost smiling. "He said to look at the corner by the window." Lena followed his gesture and froze. In the corner she'd deliberately left empty, Victor had installed a new piece, a beautiful bronze sculpture of a woman mid-jump, arms outstretched, face turned upward toward an unseen safety. The plaque beneath read, "Leap of Faith, for Lena, who taught me that falling can be the beginning of flight." Tears blurred Lena's vision as she turned to find Victor watching her from across the room. He raised his glass in a silent toast, and Lena understood the message. This was his leap of faith too. Trusting that they could build something lasting, believing that love could survive in the harsh light of day, not just in the dramatic intensity of survival. The gallery was a success beyond anything Lena had imagined. By the end of the first month, she'd sold 18 paintings and received commissions for a dozen more. The grants program she'd established was supporting 20 emerging artists, and plans were already underway for the second and third galleries in different neighborhoods, creating a network of creative spaces across Chicago. But more than the commercial success, Lena loved what the gallery represented. Proof that beauty could grow from ashes, that trauma didn't have to define a person's entire story, that choosing hope over fear was radical and powerful and transformative. The wedding took place 6 months later in the gallery itself, surrounded by Lena's paintings and the people who'd helped them survive. It was small, intimate, nothing like the grand society wedding Victor could have afforded. Just 70 people who actually mattered, Rosa and the diner staff, Diana and her team, Marcus and the security detail, Catherine and James and their families, a handful of Victor's business associates who'd proven trustworthy, and representatives from the arts community Lena had been building. Agent Torres even showed up, standing in the back with arms crossed, watching with an expression that suggested she still didn't approve but respected what they'd accomplished. When Lena caught her eye, Torres nodded once. Acknowledgement, if not quite blessing. Lena wore a simple silk gown the color of champagne, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. No veil, no train, no pretense of the virgin bride. She was a woman who'd survived hell and come out stronger, and she wasn't interested in playing roles. Victor wore a charcoal suit, the same color he'd worn to their engagement announcement, and when he saw Lena walking toward him down the makeshift aisle between paintings, his expression cracked open with pure, unguarded joy. There was no religious officiant. They'd chosen a retired judge who'd known Victor for years, and agreed to perform the ceremony as a favor. The vows they'd written themselves, eschewing traditional promises for something more honest. Lena Carter, Victor began, his voice carrying through the hushed gallery. You walked into my life serving coffee and smiling like the world was safe. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act despite it. That jumping off a burning building is sometimes the only way to survive. That love can be stronger than the darkness I've lived in for so long. His hands trembled slightly as he held hers. I promise to honor your strength, to protect your dreams, to be worthy of the faith you've shown in me. I promise to choose light over shadow, creation over destruction, hope over fear. And I promise that every day for the rest of my life, I will catch you when you jump. Lena's tears fell freely now, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Victor Hale, you saved my life 3 times, once from fire, once from bullets, and once from the belief that playing small and safe was the same as being smart. You showed me that dangerous and damaged aren't the same thing, that people who've done terrible things can still choose to do better, that love doesn't require perfection, just honesty and the courage to keep trying. She squeezed his hands. I promise to be your partner, not your prisoner, to build beside you, not behind you, to remind you who you are when the weight of who you were gets too heavy. And I promise that no matter what comes, trials or threats or the ghosts of choices we can't unmake, we face it together, always together. The judge pronounced them married, and when Victor kissed her, the gallery erupted in applause. But Lena barely heard it. She was too focused on this moment, this man, this impossible, beautiful thing they'd built from nothing but survival and stubborn hope. The reception flowed seamlessly from ceremony, catering supplied by Rosie's Diner as Lena's special request. Marcus gave a toast that was surprisingly eloquent about loyalty and second chances. Catherine spoke about transformation and the courage it takes to walk away from power. Diana made everyone laugh with stories about keeping Victor and Lena out of legal trouble. But the toast that mattered most came from James, who stood with his arm around his wife, his daughter tucked against his side. A year ago, I watched my daughter see things no child should see. I killed 2 men in our living room to protect my family from Paulo Castellanos' war. And I thought, that's it. That's what my daughter will remember. Her father as a killer, our home as a crime scene, violence as the only answer to violence. James's voice roughened. But Victor and Lena showed us something different. They showed us that you can survive trauma and still build beauty, that you can acknowledge the darkness without letting it consume everything, that choosing to create instead of destroy is its own form of courage. He raised his glass. To Victor and Lena, thank you for proving that happy endings don't have to be fairy tales. Sometimes they're just 2 damaged people choosing to be better together than they could ever be apart. As the celebration continued around them, Lena and Victor slipped away to the gallery's back room, stealing a moment of quiet in the chaos. Victor pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers, and they just breathed together, married, alive, impossibly fortunate. No regrets? Victor asked softly. Lena thought about the question seriously, about everything it had cost to get here, her home, her art, her innocence, her belief that the world was fundamentally safe, about the 3 people who died, the violence she'd witnessed, the nightmares that still woke her some nights. Not about this, she said finally. Not about us. The price was too high and I hate that people died and I'll carry that forever. But choosing you, building this life together, no regrets about that. Victor kissed her softly, reverently, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. I love you, Lena Hale. The new name sent a thrill through her. Lena Hale, artist, survivor, wife of Chicago's most dangerous reformed criminal. It was absurd and perfect and completely terrifying. I love you too, she whispered back. My king turned businessman. My monster turned man. They rejoined the party, danced until Lena's feet hurt, ate Rosa's famous pie, and laughed with people who'd become family through shared trauma and stubborn survival. And when the night finally wound down, when the last guest had departed and they were alone in the gallery surrounded by Lena's art, they stood together looking at the sculpture Victor had commissioned. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd never come to that diner? Victor asked quietly. If I'd chosen a different place for coffee, a different neighborhood? Every day, Lena admitted. But then I remember. We both needed this. You needed someone to see past the crown and the violence. I needed someone to believe my dreams were worth more than safety. We found each other because we were both ready to be found. Think we can make it? Long term? There was vulnerability in Victor's voice, the fear he rarely showed anyone else. Or will the past eventually catch up? Will I eventually revert to type? And you'll realize you married a monster after all. Lena turned to face him fully, her hands framing his face, making sure he saw the absolute certainty in her eyes. Victor, we've already made it. We survived fire and bombs and federal investigations and a trial that could have destroyed us both. We built a gallery from nothing. We transformed your empire from violence to creation. We got married surrounded by people who know exactly who we are and chose to celebrate us anyway. She kissed him firmly. The past will always be there, but it doesn't get to write our future. We do that, together, every single day. 2 years later, Lina stood in the third gallery, the crown jewel of their network, located in a restored warehouse in the South Loop, watching Victor address a room full of young artists who'd received grants from their foundation. He'd gotten better at these public appearances, learned to balance authority with approachability, to inspire without intimidating. Art matters because it shows us we're not alone, Victor was saying, his voice carrying easily through the space. Because it transforms pain into beauty, trauma into testimony, survival into celebration. Every person in this room has a story worth telling. Our foundation exists to make sure those stories get heard. Lena felt the familiar flutter in her stomach. Not nervousness this time, but something else entirely. She rested a hand on the slight swell beneath her dress, marveling at the life growing there. They'd found out 3 weeks ago, had been keeping it secret while they processed the enormity of bringing a child into their complicated world. But watching Victor inspire these young artists, seeing the empire they'd built together, creative instead of criminal, generous instead of exploitative, Lena felt certain they could do this too. Could raise a child who understood that people were complex, that redemption was possible, that love could transform even the darkest histories. After the event, driving home through Chicago's familiar streets, Lena finally told him, "I'm pregnant." Victor's hands tightened on the steering wheel, the car swerving slightly before he corrected. "You're... what? When? Are you sure?" 3 weeks, I'm sure. I wanted to wait until after the gallery opening to tell you. Lena watched his profile anxiously. "Are you okay? I know we hadn't really planned. Okay?" "Lena, I'm..." Victor pulled the car over abruptly, parking on a random street, and turned to her with eyes that shone with tears. "I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. A child. Our child. A child who'll grow up knowing their father chose to be better than his past, who'll learn that mistakes don't define you forever, who'll see art and beauty and hope instead of violence." Lena took his hand, pressing it against her stomach. "We can do this, Victor. We've survived worse." Victor laughed through his tears. "That's a low bar for parenting. Well, at least it's not as bad as being hunted by a mob boss. It's our bar, and we'll clear it together." Lena leaned across the console to kiss him. "Besides, the kid will have Marcus as a godfather. They'll be the most protected child in Chicago. Marcus is going to be impossible when he finds out." But Victor's smile was radiant, all his careful control abandoned, in favor of pure joy. "A baby. We're having a baby." They sat there in the parked car talking about the future, names they liked, how to baby-proof the penthouse, whether their child would inherit Lena's artistic talent or Victor's strategic mind. And as the sun set over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Lena felt the final piece of their impossible story click into place. They'd survived fire and war and federal prosecution. They'd transformed violence into beauty, fear into hope, tragedy into triumph. And now they would raise a child in the world they'd built. Imperfect but honest, complicated but loving, forged in ashes but reaching always toward light. 3 years after that, Lena stood in that same gallery for a very different event. The exhibition was called Resurrection, Chicago's Journey from Ashes, a massive collection of work from 50 local artists, all exploring themes of survival, transformation, and hope. Lena's contribution was a series of paintings depicting the fire, the jump, the aftermath, and the rebuilding, raw, honest work, that didn't shy away from trauma, but also didn't let trauma have the final word. Critics were calling it her masterpiece. Museums were bidding for the collection. But what mattered most to Lena was the group of children sitting cross-legged in front of her largest painting, a woman mid-jump, surrounded by flames below and light above, the moment of choice crystallized in oil and canvas. Their daughter, Elena, named for Lena but her own fierce person at 2.5, sat in Victor's lap, pointing at the painting with chubby fingers. "Mama flew!" "Mama jumped," Victor corrected gently, his chin resting on Elena's dark curls, "because sometimes jumping is the only way to survive." "And Daddy caught her," Elena said with absolute certainty. "Always catches." Lena's heart swelled watching them together, this man who'd once ruled through fear, now completely undone by a toddler's demands for stories and snacks and unconditional love. He was an amazing father, patient, present, determined to give Elena every advantage while teaching her humility and kindness. The darker parts of his past still existed. There were still men who remembered Victor Hale, the crime boss, who resented his transformation or looked for weaknesses to exploit. Security remained tight, their lives more complicated than most. But they'd built something real and lasting, something worth protecting. Marcus approached carrying Elena's favorite stuffed rabbit that she'd apparently abandoned in favor of exploring. "Your daughter is fearless," he said, handing over the toy, "just like her mother." "Hopefully with better judgment," Lena laughed. "I don't want her jumping off any buildings. She'll make her own choices. You'll just teach her to choose wisely." Marcus's scarred face softened, looking at Elena. "You've both done good, you know. Built something that matters. Changed this city for the better." It was high praise from a man who rarely gave compliments. Lena felt tears prick her eyes, hormones probably, or just the weight of how far they'd come crystallizing in this moment. That night, after the exhibition closed and Elena was asleep in her room, guarded by enough security to protect a small nation, Lena and Victor stood on their penthouse balcony, looking out over the city they'd transformed together. "Do you ever miss it?" Lena asked quietly. "The power you had before? The fear and control?" Victor considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. When things are difficult, when competitors push back or the board questions my decisions, there's a part of me that remembers how easy it was to solve problems with violence, how efficient fear can be." He pulled Lena closer. "But then I come home to you and Elena. I walk through our galleries and see the art we've supported, the artists we've helped, the beauty we've created. And I realize that this..." He gestured at the city below, at their life, at everything they'd built. "This is real power, the kind that lasts, the kind that actually matters." "No regrets?" "Only one." Victor's voice roughened. "That 3 people had to die before I understood what mattered. That Mrs. Chen and Thomas Rodriguez and Sarah Brennan paid for my choices with their lives." It was a wound that would never fully heal, Lena knew. They'd established a foundation in the victims' names, had paid for their funerals and supported their families, had made sure their deaths weren't forgotten. But it would never be enough. Some debts couldn't be repaid, only honored through how you lived afterward. "They'd be proud of what you've become," Lena said softly. "What we've become together." "You think?" "I know, because we turned their tragedy into something meaningful. We made sure their deaths demanded change instead of just adding to the violence." Lena turned in Victor's arms to face him fully. "That's all any of us can do. Take the broken pieces we're given and build something beautiful from the wreckage." 5 years after the fire, a reporter from the Tribune came to interview them for a retrospective piece on organized crime in Chicago. She wanted to talk about Paolo Castellano's conviction, about the power vacuum his imprisonment had created, about whether Chicago was truly safer now. Lena and Victor sat together in the original Logan Square Gallery, now just one piece of a network that had grown to include 7 locations, a thriving arts education program, and partnerships with schools across the city. "People say you got away with it," the reporter said bluntly, "that you were just as bad as Castellano but better at public relations." Victor didn't flinch. "People are entitled to their opinions. The facts are that I cooperated with federal investigators, provided evidence that dismantled a terrorist organization, and transformed my business holdings into legitimate enterprises that employ 3,000 people and contribute millions in taxes. If that's getting away with it, I'll accept the label." But you were involved in criminal activities. You've never actually denied that. No, I haven't, because I won't insult people's intelligence by pretending I was always legitimate. Victor's voice was steady, honest. I made choices I'm not proud of. I operated in gray areas and sometimes crossed into black. But I also recognized that path led nowhere good, and I chose to change. That doesn't erase my past, but it does define my future. The reporter turned to Lena. And you married him knowing all this, knowing what he'd done. I married him knowing exactly who he was, Lena corrected. Not the sanitized version, not the public relations spin. The real person, flawed and complicated and trying every day to be better than his worst choices. That's not naivety. That's choosing to believe in redemption. Even for criminals? Even for killers? Especially for them. Because if we don't believe people can change, what's the point of rehabilitation? What's the point of second chances? Lena met the reporter's skeptical gaze steadily. My husband killed 3 men in self-defense while stopping a terrorist. He handed over the terrorist to law enforcement instead of executing him. He spent 5 years building instead of destroying. If that's not redemption, I don't know what is. The article ran with the headline, "The Mob Boss's Redemption. Can Chicago Forgive Victor Hale?" It was fair, balanced, and skeptical in all the right places. Some readers praised their transformation. Others condemned them as criminals hiding behind charity. But most just acknowledged the complicated truth, that people weren't simple, that redemption was messy, and that Chicago had undeniably changed for the better since Paolo Castellano's empire fell. 10 years after the fire, on the anniversary of the night that had changed everything, Lena and Victor returned to the site where her apartment building had stood. A community garden grew there now, a project they'd funded but let the neighborhood design and maintain. Flowers bloomed in riotous color, vegetables grew in neat rows, and a memorial stone bore the names of Mrs. Chen, Thomas Rodriguez, and Sarah Brennan. Elena, now 12 and showing early signs of her mother's artistic talent, placed fresh flowers at the memorial while her younger brother Thomas, named for one of the victims, held Lena's hand solemnly. At 7, he was all Victor's intensity and Lena's compassion, a child who felt everything deeply and wasn't afraid to show it. "Tell us the story again," Elena requested, settling on a bench beside the memorial. "About how you and Dad met." Lena and Victor exchanged glances, the story they'd told their children 100 times taking on new weight in this place where it had all nearly ended. "I was a waitress," Lena began, "and your father was a customer who liked his coffee black and his eggs scrambled. I flirted with him because he tipped well and had kind eyes. I didn't know he was dangerous." "Were you scared when you found out?" Thomas asked. "Terrified," Lena admitted. "But then someone tried to burn down my building, and your father came to save me. And I realized that dangerous and good aren't opposites, that someone can be both." Victor picked up the thread. "And your mother taught me that being powerful doesn't have to mean being feared, that you can build an empire on creation instead of destruction, that love can transform even the darkest heart if you let it." "Then you jumped off the building, and Dad caught you," Elena said dramatically. "And you fell in love and got married and built galleries and had us." "That's the short version," Victor laughed. "The real version had a lot more complications." "Like what?" "Like federal investigations and trials, and people who didn't believe we could change," Lena said honestly. Their children knew the truth. Age-appropriate versions, but truth nonetheless. They knew their father's past, knew about the violence that had marked their family's beginning. But we kept choosing each other, kept choosing to build instead of destroy. And eventually, we created something worth more than anything we'd lost. They sat in the garden as the sun set, their children playing among the flowers while Lena and Victor remained on the bench, hands intertwined, reflecting on the decade that had passed since fire had rewritten both their lives. "Would you do it differently?" Lena asked quietly. "If you could go back, knowing what it would cost?" Victor considered the question seriously. "I'd save those 3 people if I could. I'd take their place in a heartbeat. But everything else? The investigation, the trial, the transformation, us?" He looked at their children, at the garden growing from ashes, at the life they'd built together. "No, I wouldn't change a thing, because this, all of this, is worth every scar." Lena leaned her head on his shoulder, watching Elena chase Thomas through the garden, their laughter echoing in the space where she'd once been certain she would die. "Me neither," Not one single thing. 15 years after the fire, the Lena Carter Foundation had grown into one of Chicago's most respected arts organizations. The galleries had expanded to 12 locations. The grant program had supported over 500 artists, and Lena's own work hung in museums around the world. Her Resurrection series considered a defining artistic statement on trauma and survival. Victor had fully divested from anything remotely criminal, his empire now consisting of legitimate real estate, technology investments, and the foundation he ran with Lena. They employed thousands, paid their taxes, and contributed millions to Chicago's economy. The FBI had long since closed their investigation, and while some still whispered about Victor's past, most recognized the transformation as genuine. Paolo Castellano died in prison, his empire forgotten, his name a cautionary tale taught to law students and aspiring criminals alike. The families he'd terrorized moved on. The politicians he'd corrupted were replaced, and Chicago continued its complicated dance between darkness and light, violence and hope. At the Foundation's 15th anniversary gala, Lena stood to give a speech, looking out at the gathered crowd. Artists and patrons, survivors and supporters, family and friends who'd walked this entire journey beside them. 15 years ago, I woke up in a burning building, certain I was going to die, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom. I lost my home, my art, my sense of safety. 3 innocent people lost their lives, and I fell in love with a man who was both my salvation and the source of my peril. She found Victor in the crowd, his eyes locked on hers with the same intensity he'd shown that first morning in the diner. Elena and Thomas sat beside him, now 17 and 12, old enough to understand the complicated legacy they'd inherited. People ask me all the time if I regret it, if I wish I'd never smiled at that dangerous customer, never gotten involved with Victor Hale, never survived the fire that changed everything. And my answer is always the same. I regret the violence. I regret the deaths. I regret that it took tragedy to wake us both up. But I don't regret choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes. I don't regret believing in redemption, and I don't regret loving a man brave enough to transform himself. The room was silent, every eye on her. This foundation exists because 2 broken people chose to believe that damage doesn't have to be permanent, that you can survive trauma and still create beauty, that love can be stronger than fear if you're willing to fight for it. We've supported over 500 artists, opened 12 galleries, invested millions in Chicago's creative community. But more than that, we've proven that people can change, that monsters can become men, that happy endings don't have to be fairy tales. Lena's voice strengthened, ringing with conviction. So to everyone who said it couldn't be done, who said Victor and I were too damaged, too complicated, too tainted by violence, thank you. Because you gave us something to prove. And we spent 15 years proving it. The applause was thunderous. Victor came to stand beside her, taking her hand, and together they faced the crowd that had watched them transform from victims and survivors into builders and creators. Later, alone in their penthouse after the gala ended, they stood on the same balcony where they'd had so many important conversations, looking out at the city they'd helped reshape. We did it, Lena said softly. Everything we promised. Everything we dreamed. We actually did it. You did it, Victor corrected. I just tried to keep up. No, we did it together. That's the whole point. Lena turned to face him, seeing gray in his hair now, lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and laughter and years lived fully. You could have been just another mob boss, forgotten the moment you went to prison. Instead, you're the man who transformed an empire, who chose creation over destruction, who proved redemption was possible. Because you believed in me when no one else did, when I didn't believe in myself. Victor cupped her face gently, the gesture as familiar now as breathing. You saved me, Lena. More than I ever saved you. We saved each other, Lena whispered. That's how it works. That's how it always worked. They kissed as the city lights glittered below them. 2 people who'd survived fire and war and federal investigations, who'd built an empire from ashes and raised children who understood that redemption was earned through consistent choice rather than grand gesture, who'd proven that love could be strong enough to carry the weight of impossible histories. And as they held each other in the darkness, Lena thought about the waitress she'd been, small dreams, careful choices, playing it safe. That woman would never have jumped off a burning building, would never have fallen for a mob boss, would never have testified against terrorists or built a foundation or raised children who knew their father had killed to protect them. That woman would have been safe, small, invisible. This woman, the one who'd jumped and been caught, who'd survived and thrived, who'd chosen the dangerous path and found it led to extraordinary places, she had lived, really lived, and she wouldn't trade a single scar. 20 years after the fire, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Lena walked into a small diner in Logan Square. Not Rosie's, which had closed years ago when Rosa finally retired, but a new place with the same comfortable atmosphere. She ordered coffee and took a seat in a corner booth, pulling out her tablet to review grant applications for the foundation. The waitress who brought her coffee was young, maybe 25, with artistic tattoos peeking from beneath her sleeves, and the kind of dreamy expression that suggested bigger ambitions than serving breakfast. "Anything else?" the waitress asked. Lena looked up and smiled. "Actually, yes. Are you an artist?" The waitress's eyes widened. "How did you—" "The tattoos, the charcoal smudges on your fingers, the way you're looking at that painting on the wall like you're analyzing the composition." Lena gestured to the seat across from her. "I'm Lena Hale. I run an arts foundation. We have a grant program for emerging artists. I'd love to see your work." 20 minutes later, Lena left the diner with the waitress's portfolio photos on her tablet and a familiar flutter in her chest. The woman reminded her of herself 2 decades ago, talented and dreaming and stuck serving coffee while waiting for life to begin. She called Victor from the car. "I just met someone at a diner, an artist waiting tables. I think we should give her a grant." Victor's laugh was warm and knowing. "Does she remind you of someone?" "Maybe. Is that terrible? Am I projecting?" "You're giving someone the opportunity you deserved 20 years ago. That's not projecting. That's paying it forward." Victor paused. "Come home. Elena is here with news." Lena found her daughter in the penthouse living room, practically vibrating with excitement. At 22, Elena had grown into a stunning young woman. Victor's intensity and Lena's creativity combined into someone wholly her own. "I got into the residency," Elena announced, throwing herself into Lena's arms. "The art program in Florence. A year in Italy studying restoration and classical techniques." "Elena, that's incredible." Lena held her daughter tight, pride and bittersweet joy warring in her chest. "When do you leave?" 3 months. If you think you can handle the foundation without me." Elena pulled back, suddenly uncertain. "I know I've been helping a lot, and Thomas isn't ready to step into gallery operations yet." "We'll manage," Victor said firmly from the doorway. "This is your dream, Elena. We didn't build everything we built just to hold you back from chasing it." That night, after Elena had left and Thomas was at a friend's house, Lena stood in what had been Elena's room, looking at the artwork that still covered the walls, paintings and sketches from childhood through college, each one showing the evolution of a serious talent. "She's leaving," Lena said when Victor found her there. "She's flying, like her mother taught her." Victor wrapped his arms around Lena from behind. "You jumped off a building when you were 26. Our daughter is just jumping to a different continent. She comes by it honestly." Lena laughed through unexpected tears. "When did we get old enough to have adult children leaving home?" "When we survived long enough to see them grow up." "That was never guaranteed, remember?" Victor turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "We beat the odds, Lena. Every prediction, every threat, every reason we had to fail, we survived all of it. Our children are healthy, talented, good humans. We built something that matters. We transformed a city. We proved redemption was possible. And we're still here," Lena whispered. "Still together, still choosing each other." "Always," Victor promised, "until my last breath." 25 years after the fire, Lena stood in a new gallery space, the foundation's 15th location, watching her granddaughter toddle through the exhibition on unsteady legs. Elena had married an Italian architect she'd met during her residency and given birth to Sophia 2 years ago. They split their time between Florence and Chicago, and every moment with Sophia felt like a gift. Victor sat on a bench nearby, his hair completely silver now, his movements slightly slower but his mind still sharp as ever. At 70, he'd officially retired from most business operations, content to let the next generation run the empire they'd built together. Thomas had stepped into leadership of the foundation, bringing his own vision while honoring the core mission. He'd expanded into music and theater, creating opportunities for artists across disciplines. His wife, a former grant recipient they'd supported years ago, ran the education programs. Nonna, Sophia called, reaching chubby hands up to Lena. Up, see painting. Lena lifted her granddaughter, pointing to the artwork Sophia had focused on. One of Lena's own pieces from the Resurrection series, the woman mid-jump surrounded by flames and light. That's Nonna, Lena said softly. A long time ago, when I was scared but brave. Scared and brave same? Sophia asked with a toddler's perfect logic. Yes, Piccola, they're very much the same. Being brave means being scared and doing it anyway. Lena kissed Sophia's dark curls, breathing in the baby shampoo scent of innocence. Remember that when you're older, when life gets hard, you can be scared and brave at the same time. Victor joined them, his hand finding Lena's with the automatic familiarity of 5 decades together. They stood like that, 3 generations bound by love and art and the legacy of choices made in fire and darkness, and Lena felt the circle complete. She jumped off a burning building not knowing if she'd survive, had fallen in love with a dangerous man who'd proven capable of remarkable transformation, had built an empire from ashes and raised children who understood that redemption was earned through consistent choice, had survived trials and threats and the weight of impossible histories. And now, holding her granddaughter while standing beside the man who'd caught her all those years ago, Lena understood the final truth that had taken decades to fully grasp. The happy ending wasn't the moment Victor proposed, or the gallery opening, or the trial verdict. It wasn't even the wedding, or the children, or the foundation's success. The happy ending was this: 25 years of choosing each other every single day, of building and rebuilding, of surviving and thriving, of proving that love forged in ashes could burn bright enough to light the way for generations. It was the small moments and the grand gestures, the terrible days and the transcendent ones, the scars and the healing all woven together into a life that mattered. It was the story they'd tell their grandchildren about a waitress and a mob boss who should never have met, who survived everything thrown at them, who transformed violence into beauty and fear into hope. It was the legacy written not in headlines or history books, but in art galleries and grant programs, in children raised with love and integrity, in a city made slightly better because 2 broken people chose to build instead of break. It was, simply and impossibly and beautifully, enough. I love you, Lena whispered to Victor, the words carrying 25 years of weight and promise. I love you too, Victor whispered back. Thank you for jumping. Thank you for letting me catch you. Thank you for every single day since. And as Sophia laughed in Lena's arms and the gallery buzzed with life around them, as Chicago continued its endless dance between light and shadow outside, 2 survivors stood together in the space they'd created and knew, with absolute certainty, that they'd made the right choice. Every scar, every tear, every moment of fear and doubt, all of it led here, to this moment, to this love, to this impossible, beautiful, hard-won, happy ending. And it was worth it. Every bit of it. From ashes, they'd built something eternal. And that was the greatest triumph of all.